Creating new live broadcast. Please wait. Okay, so first of all, let's do a bit of preface to this all, because otherwise it won't make much sense. Yeah. Let's address the issues of Legio IV Rapax, Rapax, and accomplished skirmishes, missile damage inflicted by missile units. Yeah. 2+2% shots per minute for all units. Or Legio Roma Invicta, that sounds more like it. There we go. So now if I press end, right, bit of preface. Even in the ancient times, Romans and Greeks would send their sons to Hibernia for educating. Another slave uprising, not surprising. But then, in the medieval era, the University of Tyre was a known thing. And also in the ancient time, the Hibernians, Irish, they had roads. They had wooden plank roads over boggy ground. And so I came across this thing.
Magnificence and greatness always come at a price.
Blah, blah, blah. I said my bit. Now, I'm eating a refresher. What I'll do, I should have put it in the description, but it's too late for that now. So what I'll do instead is I'll just post it in the chat. There you go. And then if you look at the chat replay, you'll see the link posted. But the thing itself is called Irish Wisdom Preserved in the Bible and Pyramids, and I'm about halfway through it. So I'm just gonna press play and listen to the rest of it.
They capture and plunder. They carry away great loot with them back to Africa in their ships under their leader, Gaiseric, the posterior from the Irish word geyser. And this is Roman history, as well as British propaganda, which has systematically slandered the Irish nation and church. The Vandals are said to have remained in Africa a period of 100 years, at the end of which time the Emperor of the East, Justinian,
sent his general,
Belisarius, the son, to drive them out of Africa. In the so-called historic narrative, their descendants become quickly absorbed by the surrounding population, and in a few generations they disappeared from view, not a trace of them being left. This lying slander is secretly meant to convey the impression, through the leader Gaiseric, that the Irish Church was a church of sodomy. They have not merely stigmatized the first and true church and its adherents by calling them Vandals, but they have persistently laid such emphasis upon it that the term became a synonym for all that is cruel, barbarous, and destructive. In this way, they have given to fiction the appearance of fact. Our histories are sadly in need of honest and enlightened revision in order that this Roman and British fiction may be eliminated.
The British continued what the Romans started, you see.
For the myth of Constantine, we are indebted to the spurious historian Eusebius. He is used as the authority for ascribing a vision to Constantine in which he saw a fiery cross in the heavens with the words, "By this sign, conquer." The priestly fabricators who have written all the history which has been allowed
I've got to
exist
disable
and come
nightmare
down to us
mode.
from
It's
those
not fun.
times have made a special miracle for Constantine out of an everyday occurrence of the sun's appearance in the heavens. It is a natural phenomenon that on every bright day the sun, as it proceeds on its course, can be seen in the form of a cross in the sky. Any person can see it once the attention is called to it. It is seen in midsummer, in the spring and autumn to the best advantage. Constantine is made to see it on the 27th day of October, on which day he is said to have defeated in battle Maxentius, who ruled Rome as emperor jointly with him. These things and personages are purely mythical and are taken from the Irish mythology. Conn is an Irish demigod or sun god. He is one of the mythological Irish kings. He is Conn of the 100 Battles, King Conn Cúbar, son of the heavenly wolf or sun god. As Rome stole the Irish Bible, savior, institutions, and traditions, as well as nomenclature, she stole also the name of one of the greatest of the Irish heroes to be founder of her church. Maxentius is a fictitious personage also, and the name is a compound of Latin and Irish, spelled in a camouflage fashion and alludes to the evil one. Max means great, and Antius is a name of the devil, really meaning great heat, from the aspect of the sun in midsummer when its heat is oppressive. And Tias, the heat or great heat, is Irish or Celtic. Hence, Maxentius, the fiery sun, loses its fierce heat by the 27th of October, and Conn, the genial sun, again reigns overhead. So we see here the secret illusion of the mythical
there goes
adoption
my
of the Irish sun god
two
Conn
ships.
by Rome and making him the founder.
We always knew it was
of
going to be a
Christian church
suicide,
under
but
the
hey
title
ho.
of
One of
the
our
Emperor
units has used all its
Constantine.
ammunition.
The British have featured this myth also, with the allusion to the fact that Britain assisted Rome in bringing it about, as we find this fiction woven into the story that Constantine's parents were the Emperor Constantius and his wife, Queen Helena, who came from Britain.
At some point, I'll have to
A wife
go.
is always an assistant and
Looks like I got
helpmate
some
to her
potatoes
husband.
on the boil.
So in this royal pair, we have the two mythic characters doing duty as sponsors for their offspring, the mythical founder of the Roman Christian Church, Conn, the sun god, and Helena, the moon. The moon is always said to be the spouse of the sun. That the church authorities who have appropriated this personage to whom to attribute the founding of their church acted consciously and with intent, insofar as to the character which he was meant to represent, be well understood by what Dr. Draper says regarding the honors paid to
One of our
Constantine.
units has used all its
He
ammunition.
says, quote, his statue on top of the great porphyry pillar at Constantinople consisted of an ancient image of Apollo, whose features were replaced by those of the emperor, and its head surrounded by the nails feigned to have been used, and the crucifixion of Christ arranged so as to form a crown of glory. End quote.
One of our
Apollo
units has used all its
is the
ammunition.
sun god. This clearly shows the false basis on which the claim of Rome rests. The name of her so-called founder, for obvious reasons, was not made use of until after the conquest of the Irish Church, when she appropriated as a part of the spoils the name of the mythical Irish demigod and hero king, the sun god Conn, and for effect changed the name of Byzantium to Constantinople. This, we believe, is the truth beyond the possibility of contradiction. This explanation makes it easy to understand why Lord Macaulay, the English historian, so strongly commended the work of another English writer, Gibbon, by saying that, quote, all who would write on Roman history must go back to the foundation laid down by Gibbon, end quote. All of
One
which
of our units
shows
has used
how
all its
thoroughly
ammunition.
they have endeavored to establish a belief and confidence in an authorized version of history, ingeniously composed of a good deal of myth and fiction, and caused it to be accepted as fact. The events in the life of the Emperor Constantine are written so as to make his life read like the narrative of a series of incidents which might happen to a human being in such a role as that ascribed to Constantine. And as to his vision, the cross of light in the heavens is an aspect of the sun's appearance which was well known to the priest scribes. In the morning, before the sun reaches meridian height, by half closing the eyes, one can see the great shaft of light streaming forth from the luminous orb toward the earth. This forms the upright staff of the cross of light, and on either side of the globe of the sun will be see a great arm of light which forms the horizontal beam of the cross. Constantine's being made to hear the words spoken by this sign conquer is suggested to the creator of this myth by the fact that every human being is in the form of a cross, to correspond to the solar orb. For when a man stands with body erect and arms extended laterally, he is in the form of a cross. This is where the mythmaker got the suggestion for his idea, and it is in this human body, shaped like a cross, that the ego or self must conquer his own lower nature, animal passions, appetites, lust, selfishness, and all other sinful qualities, in order that he may build up and become united with his luminous solar body, the spark of divine essence, which is vouchsafed to every human being who will strive by living a pure and enlightened moral life to attain it, even though it requires many incarnations to achieve perfection or union with one's God, one's higher self.
Ready for orders.
Eusebius has been called the father of lies, but it is not at all certain that such a man as Eusebius ever existed. His name has been useful to Roman church historians in order to have someone to whom they could attribute sayings and writings which might have been or were written long afterwards, as it was a long and laborious task which Rome had to perform when she undertook the fabrication of history, both church and secular, that would be successful in deceiving posterity in all succeeding ages. This was set forth in a letter from Thomas to Gregory when he said that, quote, "Some were prone to censure and find fault with the work of the fathers, but for my part, I'm of the opinion that instead of finding fault with them, that their work should be commended with great praise rather than condemnation, considering the difficult nature of the work that they have to do." End quote. An idea of the method they employed in forging both history and
There's a lot of him
scripture
saying end quote.
from the account lent us by Bishop Faustus, who expresses his opinion in this wise, quote, "It is certain that the New Testament was not written by Christ himself, nor by his apostles, but a long while after them, by some unknown persons, who, lest they should not be credited when they wrote of affairs they were little acquainted with, affixed to their works the names of the apostles, or of such as were supposed to have been their companions, asserting what they had written themselves was written according to these persons to whom they ascribed it." End quote. Quoted in Bible Myths by T.W. Doan, page 460. Rome has always appreciated the value of the written word, and the book is a hoary institution and adjunct to the priestly cult, to which the unsophisticated gave great credence. Therefore, for a long period of years, staffs of monks and priestly scribes were maintained in Rome and Britain, writing and composing false history to cover not only the so-called early beginnings of the church, but of all the profane history of earlier times, in order that it might correspond and not conflict with the allegories of the Bible, which book, while it remained with the ancient Irish priesthood, was a record of spiritual idealisms and characters. When Rome appropriated this book, she strove at once to make of it a history, and to give Iessa a realistic and historical character. So the names in the Bible of places which had simply a secret allusion to spiritual things and human qualities and conditions in man in his progress from the animal to the spiritual state of perfection were given a different meaning and were converted into bona fide history. Thus, with a shrewd conception and understanding of policy, Rome gave to the Irish Bible a history and a geography which, through her efforts to give it the appearance of truth as a record of actual occurrences and facts, have heaped woe and misery upon mankind. To perfect this project, Rome preached and instigated the wars of the Crusades. This was for the express purpose of getting possession of the countries of the East and to give names to places in this country called Palestine or Syria, to correspond with the allegorical and cryptic names, Irish names, in the Bible.
Let's just speed things up.
And Irish names, they
the
are
inevitable
still to this
happen.
day. And this is the main reason why the Irish Roman Catholics of our day were not encouraged to read or study the Bible.
Oh yeah,
It was because
Dark
of this,
Ages
too,
is
that the
because
Irish language
of that.
was mainly suppressed and all but destroyed. To carry out this scheme of keeping the knowledge of these things from the world, Rome has conveniently invented a list of fictitious names which the priests assumed in order to set up authorities supposed to have lived in the periods of time assigned to them, and who would be cited by posterity to verify the falsifications which they had established as facts.
Don't know what these guys are doing
Such are
over
the
here.
names Herodotus, Manetho, Berosus, Josephus, Irenaeus, Origen, and Eusebius. These historians appear, in the light which we have today of her doings, as so many fictitious personages to whom to attribute writings which were done by the Roman and British priests of much later times. They were very busy concocting history after the English invasion of Ireland and the conquest of the Irish Church, and right away in the early part of the 13th century they set about altering the Irish Bible to make it their own. This revision or alteration took place about the year 1208 of our era. King James' agents have tried their hands at altering it since then, and it has been revised again in
One of our
day.
units has used all its
At the
ammunition.
time of this writing, the public press gives notice under date of May 22nd, 1922, that in the Presbyterian Convention held at Des Moines, Iowa, there was a movement on foot for
Our men flee the
shorter
field of
Bible,
battle.
but
This
it
is a
failed
shameful
of
display.
adoption.
Yep.
So the
Our
original
men
Irish
flee the
Bible
field of
has been
battle.
tampered with and
This is a
altered from
shameful
time to time
display.
according to the interests or purposes of those able to do it. Chapter 10. Hebrew, a
men
sacerdotal
flee the
dialect
field of
improvised
battle.
from the Irish
This is a
language for
shameful
the secret
display.
use of the
Our
priests.
men flee the field of battle. This is a shameful.
A mystery once explained is a mystery no longer. Yet I hold that the solution and explanation of the Bible origin is of vastly more interest and benefit to mankind than to allow it to remain a secret and a mystery. Intellectual mankind needs to know the truth. Fables or fiction cannot be substituted for it, nor will the great mass of inquiring minds concede that the clergy is the only class that is entitled to know the truth when it can be acquired, while the multitude may be regaled with fables and myths. It was in the spirit of this latter idea that the English churchman Dr. Burnet wrote his treatise De Statu Mortuorum, purposely in Latin, to instruct the clergy only, not for the benefit of the laity, saying that too much light is hurtful for weak eyes. Bible Myths, page 136. We do not agree with him in the sense that he wished to deceive men. Our purpose is to enlighten, and the proofs already given cannot be disputed or contradicted. The Old and New Testaments are just copies transcribed and made over and supplemented with additions from the ancient Aryan Gospels of the elder Magian priesthood of Arian or Aaron.
Oh, good. Another fight which I might lose.
I know that the
But I might
Christian
win
world
it.
will be surprised to learn that it has been so grossly deceived and imposed upon by Roman and English churchmen in this matter. Deception of the people as a policy was a principle on which both priesthoods were in hearty accord, much as they differed on denominational lines or in allegiance to different religious rulers. However, we have given out the real truth, and it cannot be denied, gainsaid, or explained away. The proof is now given out. It is as open and as plain as day for anyone who will take the trouble to investigate. Only a public ignorant of the Irish language could accept such a barefaced fraud. I declare that anyone who is at all competent to examine the facts as herein stated will be astonished to find it possible that such a lie could find credence. Under any other circumstances, only universal ignorance of the true facts could bring it about. Hence, the Dark Ages were ushered in through the instrumentality of Rome and Britain. The very Bible names prove it. So also does the name of the Great Pyramid prove that it was built by this same order of the Irish Magian priesthood, the knowledge of which has also been suppressed. The Irish scriptures were palmed off on the world by Rome, with the aid of British priests who translated them into Greek in order that it might pass for the original tongue in which they were composed. Then, from that language, they've been translated into other languages, such as Latin, Syriac, and others. The study of and instruction in the Irish language was not allowed, and as it was intended, it suffered a great loss in its cultural vocabulary. By this means, they sought to drop all remembrance and to destroy all trace of the Bible origin and its authors. And this is why the Irish language was interdicted and forbidden to be taught in the schools or even to be spoken. At one time, the British government made it a crime punishable by death to speak it. See McGugan's History of Ireland. This makes it clear that the motive behind this policy was not, as hitherto advanced, solely a political one, but they found it convenient to retain the Irish idioms in the Bible for the name of God. It was difficult and next to impossible to find suitable substitutes in the translations for the ingenious and beautifully expressive titles of the deity and of the solar sun in the Irish language. It is the richest language in spiritual expression that has yet been evolved in which to utter praise to God. Sanskrit and Hebrew are its children or offspring. Both of these languages were composed and given written form by the Irish Arya missionary priesthood, but at very different periods, hence the similarity of these languages to the Irish. Sanskrit was intended for the use of the
One of our
priesthood,
units has
which
used
the
all its
Irish
ammunition.
missionaries established in India. It was changed to suit the vocal peculiarities of the people whose use it was intended for, just enough from the parent Irish in phonetic and inflectional aspects. There can be no doubt about it. Here's what Max Muller says. Quote, "The Semitic languages also are all varieties of one form of speech, though we do not know that primitive language from which the Semitic dialects diverged. Yet we know that at one time such language must have existed. We cannot derive Hebrew from Sanskrit or Sanskrit from Hebrew, but we can well understand how both may have proceeded from one common source. They are both channels supplied from one river,
One of our
and
units
they
has used
carry,
all its ammunition.
though not always on the surface, floating materials of language which challenge comparison, and have already yielded satisfactory results to careful analyzers." End quote. Max Muller's observations show that he was on the right path to discover the mother language of these two branches.
One of our units has used
All
all
that
its
he had to
ammunition.
do was to look across the narrow sea which separates England from Ireland and find it there. Or did he not know that Irish was the one river which supplied both channels and refrained from announcing it? He hits the nail so squarely on the head that it is hard to believe that so able and shrewd an investigator did not know.
Our men
He was a
flee the
professor
field
of
of battle.
languages at Oxford,
This is
England,
a
and well
shameful
knew
display.
what an adverse statement would be aroused against him if he proclaimed it. He left it for another to do. England had for so long a time stood between Ireland and the rest of the world that after denuding her of her ancient landmarks and throwing a blanket of oblivion over her,
Our
he
general is
hesitated
under
to
attack.
remove it and be engulfed in the storm of wrath and enmity which he would arouse among the churchmen and the governing class of England. It is difficult for me to believe that so keen an observer was also, like so many other scholars and investigators, a credulous dupe deluded by the false histories of the past ages as written by the Roman and British priest scribes. No, it is quite obvious that he
One of our
knew
units
his
has used
England,
all its
and if he
ammunition.
wished to retain his professorship and standing, he had to be careful as to what extent he disclosed his discoveries and convictions. He was treading on forbidden ground. Hebrew was a secret dialect which was devised by the Irish priesthood to preserve their secret lore and rituals. Its use was kept exclusively for the priests, thereby keeping all knowledge of sacerdotal things from the uninitiated or the laity. as it was composed and made use of by the Irish priests of Iessa to preserve their secret lore, it was taken over and made use of by the Roman Church to conceal and to make plausible the secret fraud which she had perpetrated upon the Christian world. This explains why it was said that only one copy of the original first scriptures was written in Hebrew. And this also shows us why Hebrew is so nearly like the Irish language. To further this deception, she had them copied into Greek. This explains what has always been a puzzle to investigators, why the so-called Hebrew people who figured in the myth with Jesus as his apostles and who have their own cultural Hebrew language should write the four Gospels of the New Testament in Greek. Hebrew was never spoken by the Aramaic people of Syria, the so-called Jews, or by the people of any other country. It was used by the ancient Irish priesthood of Iessa, precisely as Latin is today used in. The Roman priests know this to be true, and many of the Protestant clergy know it, and are conscious of being impostors and that they are perpetrating a cheat and a fraud, which must be exposed for the scrutiny of the intellectual world today. In my studies and investigations in search of knowledge and light, I became convinced that Hebrew was an artificially constructed language of the priests, as in our day we have the newly constructed languages of Esperanto and Baldabuk. I kept my discovery a secret, but in time I found that there were other investigators who had also discovered that Hebrew was not what the Roman and British churchmen have claimed it to be, that is, the national language of God's chosen people of a country in Asia, the Hebrew or so-called Jewish race. Here is what J.M. Price says, quote, "The Hebrew language was at first a secret sacerdotal jargon of Egyptian origin, and St. Gregory of Nyssa asserted, Horatio, page 12, that the most learned men of his day knew positively that it was not as ancient as other languges, and did not become
You're going
the
to form up?
language of the
No,
Jews
you're just going to
until
stand
after
there
their
in a
departure from Egypt."
as a mob.
The Apocalypse, page 98. The story of the Jews being captive in Egypt and later taking their departure from there is a pure myth, nicely constructed to deceive the unsophisticated, and
One of our
represents
units
the
has used
descent
all
of
its
the spirit
ammunition.
of man into the flesh or body. The Jew represents the spirit, and Egypt, a cryptic name, represents the flesh or body. Egypt is a name formed for this purpose in the allegory. The Irish brought religion and civilization to Egypt, and that religion was sun worship. The word Jew is derived from an idiomatic Irish word, iud, yod, meaning the day or light. It alludes to the priests of the sun, the followers of the light, those who had wisdom. The word Lud is camouflaged when it is converted in English by using the letter J instead of I to begin the word, there being no J in the Irish alphabet. So, by also leaving out the letters DH from the original Irish spelling, I-U-D-H, the doctors have formulated the word Jew. This deception being unsuspected, it has served the tricksters until now. There are other idiomatic names in the Irish language for Jew and Hebrew, which give unmistakable proof that they are solely and truly of Irish origin. One of these names for Jew is Yule, pronounced Yule. It expresses the attributes of the sun when at his highest power and dignity, and is the name for the month Yule, July. It is from this idea, which originated with and was developed by the Irish priests of Iessa, that was afterwards copied by the Roman Church priests when they wrote their false history of Rome, and bestowed the names of the months of the year when the sun is at his greatest power, upon two of their historic characters, Julius and Augustus Caesar. Yule signifies in Irish learning and knowledge. The Irish attributed these qualities to the sun, so, in accordance with this idea, the Roman priests in their fictitious history have Julius Caesar write the book.
Our men
Thus we
flee
have
the
a history
field of
of
battle.
Caesar's
This
campaigns,
is a shameful
of priestly composition. These attributes were ascribed to the sun by the Irish cult of Iesa, and those who embraced the religious life were the Jews, and not our poor brothers who own the city of New York. A friend once told me that he had heard it stated that the Irish were the Hebrews. At the time, I thought the statement absurd, and it made no impression. I took it more as a witticism, or perhaps a cynical remark. But to my own surprise, I have found that the statement was the real truth as regarding the ancient Irish. It is very evident to me, then, that St. Gregory would make a play of exposing the recent origin of the Hebrew language, if by so doing he could establish that it really ever was the language spoken by the fictitious Jewish people who were claimed to have been held as captives in historic Egypt. This is an example of how spurious authority has been set up by priest scribes to make a fiction appear like fact, to make a false impression on the minds of men. A recent writer in the public press made the statement that, quote, the Irish language was spoken in the Garden of Eden, end quote, thereby implying that it was the God-given and original language of Adam and Eve and of the first patriarchs, biblical characters, and of the master adepts who wrote the first scriptures and formulated the mythical legend of our first parents, placing them in the Garden of Eden. There is no doubt as to whom we are indebted for the Bible. It is the plainest and most evident truth, stripped of the disguise under which it has for so long a time been hidden by the British and Roman churchmen. Any scholar and thinker cannot fail to so recognize it, and many will blush to think that they did not see through it before. The statement above quoted regarding the Irish language in the absence of correct knowledge passed unnoticed, no doubt, by the general public, and, so far as I could see, brought no comment in the press. But to me, who had been engaged in research work in that line of study, it was full of significance. Whoever the writer may have been, he did not specify that it was the Hebrew language that was spoken by our first parents, but instead, the Irish language. It would indeed be a strange phenomenon in the growth of language if two peoples of such different racial stocks, living so far apart in geographical location as Ireland and Syria, should speak the same or nearly the same language, and all the more so when it is a cultural language without there being a direct and special cause for its easy to understand. It is a self-evident impossibility. The word Hebrew is derived from the Irish root word Ea, spelled alternatively A-O-D-H and A-O-I, meaning fire, the Vesta of the ancient Irish priests of the sun.
Oh, that's the priesthood of Vesta is
in Irish
an Irish one.
Eavrak, which has been anglicized into Hebrew. Ea also signifies a cause, matter in course of change, a compact, a confederacy, the learned, a vocation, learning, science, wise, a flock,
Our men
knowledge,
flee the field of
discipline,
battle.
instruction,
This is a shameful
honor,
display.
respect, a country, an island, a tribe. This definition of the word Ea aptly applies to the cult of men which are meant to be secretly known by the term Hebrew. So it is the name of a high order or degree of the ancient Irish priests of the sun, or the religion of Iesa Creost, the sun god. They were the priests of the sacred fire. So from the root word Ea, we get the word Heber, H-E-B-E-R, meaning fire, who is figuratively the brother of the sun, and hence a Hebrew, the priest of the sun. All of which proves the Irish origin and character of the Hebrew Bible and its spiritual ideals and truths. It is this Irish evidence in the Bible which undoubtedly caused the idea to be advanced that the Irish were the two lost tribes of Israel, which is but further evidence of confusion worse confounded. As there never were two lost tribes in the sense set forth, it is purely mythical.
General!
1. Nice.
The following is a list of Irish words which have been jargonized with their Hebrew form. I might easily extend the list, but this number of words will suffice to prove, as stated, that Hebrew is but a secret dialect reconstructed from the Irish for the use of the priesthood. Some words given here of both Irish and Hebrew are synonyms.
Ooh,
Others are slightly changed in meaning and form, but plainly showing that they are of common origin. Such, for instance, are the Irish words ciocras, pronounced kukras, meaning hunger, and the word kis, pronounced kis, meaning rent. The Hebrew form
got
of
to
the
check
first
on the
word
spuds.
is
I'm going to
chukeo,
pause this just a
meaning
minute.
his
Intermission time. Right, I'm back now. Potatoes are going to need another 20 minutes, I'd say. So,
palate, and the second word has the same form as in the Irish and means a purse. Some words also have two or more forms which are given. This list makes it very clear that a great deception has been practiced upon the world. Every Celtic scholar, investigator, and thinker will at once comprehend the incontrovertible nature of the proof here submitted in this list of Irish words with their Hebrew derivatives as to who the Jews and Hebrews were. British and Roman lies cannot prevail against it. The ancient Irish priesthood of Vaesa had not only a secret system of writing called Ogham, O-G-H-A-M, but they had also special dialects formulated from the Irish language, each being a perfect language in itself, such as for law, music, etc. One of these dialects was our so-called Hebrew language, which was reserved exclusively for the use of the Irish priests. It was used for the ritualistic purposes and to secretly preserve their spiritual ideals. It was made use of by the Roman Church after the suppression of the Irish Church. From this list of words, it can be seen that the Hebrew words are just altered and changed enough from the original to deceive the unsuspecting among the Irish laity, who by chance might happen to have access to it. But to the non-Irish of a later day, or people of other races, it could easily be made to appear as an original language developed by a distinctly different race of people, said to be called Hebrew. So, by means of suppressing the cultural Irish language, it was easy for Rome, with the aid of her British confederates, to easily enough palm off on the world the Hebrew Bible. It was translated into Greek in accordance with the plan for concealment and for the purpose of staging the drama of the Bible story and episodes over in Palestine. It has been transcribed and altered many times since, but even yet its ancient landmarks are still there. The people who settled these American colonies knew nothing of the fraud that was perpetrated on them regarding the scriptures, and they have unwittingly passed on the deception to the people of our day. With the aid of the art of printing and the zeal of creed propaganda, the deception has spread among the ignorant masses as well as among the so-called enlightened, with the exception of the Roman English clergy. No impartial student can study the Irish language without becoming convinced that it is the original language of the Scriptures. Ample proof of this fact will be found all through these pages, and even in the short list of Irish and Hebrew words which has been submitted here. The Irish Roman Catholic priests who have been the custodians of the literary language have been guilty of deletion, and it is evident that in the compilation of Irish dictionaries there are many omissions of words, a thing not to be wondered at when the purpose behind such omission is known. However, there is sufficient evidence left to prove the Bible to be of unmistakable Irish origin, without a shadow of doubt, and also to furnish convincing evidence that the ancient Irish were the so-called chosen people of the Bible story. The man who was striving to live a spiritual life was an Iudak, Jew from Lud, the day, showing that he was a disciple or a devotee of the sun. Those who had advanced and were seeking a higher order of spirituality are, in the Bible story, called the Israelites, or disciples of Iesa, the god of the sun, and his spirit in man. The average man, or the common run of humanity, is comprehended in the term Philistine. This word is taken from the Irish word fil, F-U-I-L, pronounced fil, meaning blood. It also signifies a family or tribe. In its biblical application, it comprehends all those who are absorbed in carnal things, the flesh and the world, rather than the things of the Spirit, so meaning the worldly ones. With this revelation of truth, we can see readily why the assembly of clerics who revised the Bible from time to time always did so behind closed and barred doors. They were put under oath not to reveal the matters which were discussed while that work was being done, a conspiracy to suppress and hide the truth from the people. We must consider that Christian theology is taken bodily from the ancient Irish concept of the beneficent and creative sun for a center and ideal, and disguised it so that it could not be traced. Recognizing that fact, and knowledge of the Irish language will enable any investigator to recognize the original parent language of the Bible. The great injustice done to the Irish people and the so-called Jews of our day becomes at once apparent. The theological idea of the ancient Irish priesthood was that the Son was the Logos, the Creator, and the greatest representative of God. It was through the Son that all good came to mankind. The Son was the great being through whom was received light and knowledge. All good came through the Son, and he
definitely
was the
on the
greatest
Silk Road.
visible
Yep, that's
representative
for sure.
of the great unseen deity. Any
Oh,
man
Warhorse
among the
passages.
Irish who was
Yep.
ready to enter the search for light, the spiritual life, was known as a Ludak, Jew, and entered into the path of the spiritual life. The Son was the embodiment of all that was good, and the Irish personified him as a champion, warrior, and hero whom they strove to emulate. There is no mistaking the ideals and idiomatic names in the Irish language, the first cultural language on this point, as the following words will show. From the word lug, day, we get ludak, pronounced yudak, ludagiak, ludag, three different forms to express the name Jew, which stood for the followers of the day or sun. And the Irish word ludikiak, judgment, is from the same root. These words are not borrowed words and grafted on the language, but are of the parent stem. Another name of Jew, deep-rooted in the Irish language and all the sophistry in Roman or English
conquer that
high
area.
churchdom, cannot remove it. It is Yule, L-U-I-L, pronounced Yule, a Jew. Why does this happen to be so? It is because with the ancient Irish priesthood of the Son, the embodiment of all good, he was in his highest power and potency after
They're unfriendly.
climbing the hill
I see.
up to the Sun's Day, the 24th of June, during the month of Yule, July. He manifested himself in warm, sunshiny days, dispensing his beneficence to all nature and to mankind. These warm days were, metaphorically speaking, called his companions, and therefore were said to be his disciples. The month of Iyul was the month of his essential power and warmth, and from that fact his initiated devotee of the priesthood of Ayesa was called an Iyul, or Jew, after the sun's aspect and attributes. As the sun is the visible center of light, he is the great teacher. He contains and imparts to mankind all light and knowledge. All who are wise in esoteric things recognize this to be true. As to his natural aspect in relation to the physical world, his beneficence and influence are everywhere manifested. All earthly life
No
depends upon the
siege
sun.
equipment.
The Irish word Iyul signifies knowledge, learning, art, science, judgment, a way, attendance, light, the month, Iyul, and Iyul, a Jew. From the same root we get the words Iulaidhe, a leader, Iullagach, sprightly, light, cheerful, Iulmhar, wise, judicious, Iulmharach, skillful. These facts and the lesson of truth they convey can be verified by anyone who will investigate. The Duke of Argyll, in The Unity of Nature, says,
Right,
quote,
next turn then.
"We have found in the most ancient records of the Aryan language proof that the indications of religious thought are higher, simpler, and purer as we go back in time." End quote. Quoted in Donnelly's Atlantis, page 447. We have taken our readers back to the etymological foundation of the word Jew. It is of the very warp and woof of the first cultural language that was spoken in this round of existence, the language evolved by the great Magian priests of Era during thousands of years before their migration towards the east to give light and knowledge to the younger and undeveloped races of mankind. Chapter 11. The Irish, the first cultural nation, the earliest missionary teachers, and the great temple builders of the ancient world. One of the aims of the propaganda for spreading misinformation regarding Ireland was to create an impression, because of a similarity between the customs of the Irish and those of the Hindus, that the Irish and their customs came originally from the East or India. Really, on the contrary, this fact only confirms the truth that the Irish gave their customs to the Hindus during their missionary sojourn in that country. The Hindus have never been known as a colonizing race, while we have overwhelming evidence to show that Ireland was the greatest colonizing country of the ancient world. They were the real pathfinders of the world. As to the likelihood of a Hindu migration to Ireland in the past, the author of Atlantis says on page 416, quote, "The Hindus have never, within the knowledge of man, sent out colonies or fleets for exploration, but there is abundant evidence, on the other hand, of migrations from Atlantis eastward."
I think I've got to do my bit to wipe out all of the resistance in Iberia. They just constantly keep fighting back.
Yet have preserved no memory of the expeditions or colonizations by which they acquired that knowledge. End quote.
End quote.
Once the plain truth is made known, the plot of the conspirators becomes evident on all sides, and the fabricators of spurious history are seen to have gone to such absurd lengths, among others, as to invent the fabulous tale of the lost continent of Atlantis, described by Plato, in order to carry out their purpose to obscure Ireland's great past. This great past, if known, would at once prove to the whole world that Ireland was the original parent country of learning, the sciences, and spiritual culture, and that the motherland of true religion. This fact is cryptically preserved by tradition, and the myth that schools were established there by Ullum Ullo, which name means doctor or professor of science, and indicates the high hierophant of the Irish Magian sun cult. It is also alluded to in the story of Cadmus, first one, the first to establish schools. It is further confirmed by the tradition, veiled in cryptic form, that long before real or actual schools were established there, a certain Phineas Pharsa, from Finn, the sun, and Phar, a man, a Phoenician, had established schools on the plains of Shinar, us, we, ourselves. This fabled place, for the purpose of deception, has been located in Persia. Thus, Phineas Pharsa and the plains of Shinar is but a secret allusion to the fact that the Irish Magian adept cult of the sun worship, who here on this island were the first men to develop the latent or potential intellectual and spiritual powers within themselves, here erected the first schools and laid the foundation for all the culture, religious
Apparently
and
I have a
secular,
treaty
which
with
exists in the
Bithynia.
world today.
So let's make sure I'm not
This
got
is
any
a
treaties
fact
with
of
them.
fundamental truth, which nothing can shake or destroy.
I give you greeting
It is
and my
attested to
attention
on all
for the next
sides,
few
upon
minutes.
close examination, by the cultural
The lack of
idioms
your
of the
goods.
Bible and the esoteric truths preserved
I fear
in the
this ending will
symbolic monuments
tempt
of the great
beggars,
pyramid group
bandits,
in
and
Egypt and
wolves to
elsewhere
come to
in the East.
war.
They have left indisputable
Excellent.
evidence of this culture
In
in the
ferrying
religious
your
rites and
dead to the
institutions,
afterlife,
which they've
Charon
introduced
will be
here with
busier
a
than
sun worship and
prostitutes at
civilization
Carthage.
to both North and South America. There is the most incontestable proof of this, as will be shown.
Mission aborted.
This purpose to obscure
Defeat the
a
following army in
knowledge of
battle.
her
Well,
history
I just
and
did that.
institutions may be further seen in the effort which has been made to create a doubt as to the origin of her round towers and the purpose for which they were erected. There is no doubt whatever in the writer's mind but that the round tower has always been a stubborn fact for them to dispose of, and we are not surprised to find that they have on
No
hand
settlement bites the
records
dust.
fabricated since the invasion, which will show that many of those towers were destroyed by an act of nature instead of by the willful acts of ruthless destroyers. One of the methods employed by those fabricators to isolate and minimize Ireland's historical importance is pretty well reflected, as will be noted, in the description given by Diodorus Siculus, intended for effect on posterity, portraying her as some obscure and little-known island in some remote and unfrequented part of the Atlantic Ocean, just as if he were introducing a knowledge of her to the world for the first time, or preserving her very name from oblivion.
Let's see.
The excerpt, which will show this implied mendacity on the part of Diodorus, will also include as an authority the untruthful Giraldus Cambrensis.
That provides
In referring to the
Warhorse,
latter,
so that's
Mr.
the one I'm
Donnelly
going
is
with.
evidently not aware of his untruthful character. So we find him again, among others, in his role as an authority, as was intended. Regarding the round towers, those unique and peculiarly original Irish monuments connected with sun worship, Mr. Donnelly says,
Do not wander in like a desert beggar.
attempts
If you
have
have
been made to
something to
show
say,
by
say it
Dr.
like a
Petrie and
civilized
others
man.
that these extraordinary structures are of modern origin and were built by the Christian priests in which to keep their church plate. But it is shown that the annals of Ulster mention the destruction of 57 of them by an earthquake in AD 448, and Giraldus Cambrensis shows that the loft nave was created by an inundation or sinking of the land in AD 65.
Hello, Brucey. We're listening to
End quote.
History of Ireland. End quote.
Moreover, we find Diodorus Siculus in a well-known passage referring to Ireland,
Ireland.
describing it as, quote, an island in the ocean over against Gaul to the north, and not inferior in size to Sicily, the soil of which is so fruitful that they mow there twice in the year. End quote.
End quote.
Donnelly
Oh, so
goes
to be
on
sure,
to
to be
say,
sure.
quote, he mentions the skill of their harpers, their sacred groves, and their singular temples of round form. End quote. Atlantis, page 416. We here see a conflict of opinion in the statements attributed to Dr. Petrie and others in Diodorus Siculus. We are reminded of a proverb which says, a lie must have long legs or it will be overtaken. The propagandists have evidently suffered a lapse of memory right here on this point regarding
don't think-
the antiquity of those towers.
Maybe that
The
hill can
effect
provide some...
of all this false information has been to set men astray in
Yeah.
their quest for
Yeah,
a
it can
solution
do.
as to what country or people we are indebted to for those monuments. Sir John
Hello, Alphabet
Lubbock,
Cat.
quoted in Atlantis, page 417, says, quote,
You
"They've been
should be able to
supposed by
see.
some
Let
to
me
be
just
Scandinavian,
copy and
but
paste
no
the
similar
link
buildings
again.
exist in Norway, Sweden, or Denmark, so that this style
So if
of
you're curious
architecture
about this, there it
is
is.
no doubt anterior
Irish
to the
religion
arrival
civilization
of the
held us
Northmen."
not your Romans in the
End
Sassanaks
quote.
so hindered it all. We
That
was
is,
Atlantis,
their
so you
arrival
were.
in
We were the
Ireland.
Phoenicians.
It seems puerile and absurd that any investigator possessing even the ordinary amount of acumen necessary to deal with the subject of the round towers should honestly think,
Enemy
much less
reinforcements
circulate the
approaching.
opinion, that the towers were built in Roman Christian times and give as a reason that it was a place where the priests kept their church plate. It is, to say the least, disingenuous. The knowledge necessary to the solution of the question of the round towers is not obscure or remote from men who, even in a small measure, have given thought to the investigation of things symbolic. The explanation of the round tower is simple, and the purpose of its use easy to apprehend. This understanding will at once enable anyone to determine in what country it originated and who the builders
Not much
were.
visibility.
Those who are responsible for disseminating misinformation know this fact well. The misinformation is but a part of the plan of concealment. The round tower is peculiarly an Irish or Aryan symbol of the sun worship. In their worldwide migrations to preach the gospel, the Irish erected the towers in association with their temples. They are symbols of the phallus and represent the creative power of God through the Lord's Son, Iesa, both in nature and in man. It has a natural, mystical, and spiritual significance. The same idea has been borrowed and embodied in the modern church spire. The remains of those towers are found as far apart from Ireland as India in the east and from Ireland to New Mexico and Colorado in the west. The author of Atlantis, page 418, most pertinently says, quote, "It will not do to say that the resemblance between those prehistoric and singular towers in countries so far apart as Sardinia, Ireland, Colorado, and India is due to an accidental coincidence." End quote. It is sometimes necessary, in dealing with a shameless and persistent propaganda of falsehood, to speak in a plain and direct manner, especially against powerful and subtle agencies which have been able, through means of the written page as a medium for misrepresentation, either by alteration or by omission altogether, so successfully to obliterate and reduce to an unimportant and insignificant character the history or story of the greatest nation of ancient times, if not of all time. The commercial greatness of this nation was unrivaled. Her universities and schools of learning, not only in medieval times but anciently, made her the intellectual sun of Europe, as Professor Sigerson of Dublin recently declared.
Jupiter gives us strength.
Without any exaggeration whatever, and
Our
with
general is
justice,
under
we may
attack.
supplement his statement and say that she was truly the intellectual light of the whole world. Her ethical culture has never been equaled, let alone surpassed, as evidenced by our Bible, which, when rightly understood
Bible.
with its ideal counterpart in stone,
Romans,
the great
ready for
pyramid
duty.
temple pillar of Iesa, is her crowning glory.
Riders, advance! Riders,
So it becomes
at the
very
double!
apparent why there has been such an amount of feigned ignorance regarding the origin of the round towers and the failure of those with knowledge to give out correct information about them. It is absolutely certain and without a shadow of doubt that the papal hierarchy at Rome, and its members in Britain and Ireland as well, were in possession of this knowledge, and that they also
I've
had
heard
a lively knowledge of
quite a
the long
few
and
explanations
continuous
of round
intercourse
towers.
between Ireland and the American
Grain
continent.
silos, folly towers.
The traditions of this intercourse never died out among the Irish. The old tradition of St. Brendan sailing to the land of the West in AD 545 from the foot of the Great Headland in carry which bears his name is but merely a ray to shed light upon this fact. There is evidence that the fact of this intercourse was a common tradition along the Atlantic coast of Europe, and it is safe to say that Rome knew of the colonizations made by the Irish on the western continent and of the religious establishments,
The enemy general
which
is
it was
dead.
their wont to set up wherever they planted a colony. With due caution to the reader to make a proper allowance for the attempt of the Roman churchmen always to connect the Irish with the Roman Church, we will let the Abbé Brasseur de Bravure speak on this point. In a note to his translation of the sacred book of the Fathers, the book quoted in Atlantis, page 419, he says, quote, "There is an abundance of legends and traditions concerning the passage of the Irish into America, and their habitual communication with that continent many centuries before the time of Columbus. We should bear in mind that Ireland was colonized by the Phoenicians, or by people of that race. An Irish saint named Vigil, who lived in the 8th century,
That makes a lot of sense, actually. The Phoenicians had access to Michigan copper, and it's
at first he wrote to the Pope
like
in reply to
forensics
the
of
charge, but afterward he went to
metallurgy.
Rome
Forensics
to
is
specify
apparently an easy thing to
and
do.
there
It's
he proved to
every
the Pope that the
every
Irish
metal
had been
can be
accustomed
identified
to
where it's been mined from,
communicate with the
and yeah, so the
transatlantic
ancient world had copper from the New World, from
In view
Michigan,
of the
which is
knowledge which
known
we
as
possess
some of the
today,
purest
which
copper
is
in the
founded
world,
upon that knowledge, it is worthwhile to consider here
which meant the
but
Phoenicians
some
were
of the
in contact with that
circumstances
world.
connected with the voyage of Columbus. In the accounts, be it remembered, we have been informed that he sought aid from the church fathers. He traveled about from one church establishment to another, and it is said that he went to Rome to seek aid there. However that may be, a junta composed mostly of the church fathers in Spain, after hearing his views and beliefs, refused him assistance or approval. This opposition lasted for a number of years, but was later evidently withdrawn, as we find that it was through the influence of a father confessor of a Spanish monastery that King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella fitted out the expedition which enabled Columbus to embark upon the voyage westward. Spain at the time, with its king and queen, was almost completely under the church influence. We are told that Columbus's reason for embarking on this voyage was an ardent desire to plant the standard of the cross in the new lands which he might discover, and that he believed that by sailing westward he would be able to find a new trade route to the Indies. These reasons, which have been given out, are suspicious and may be dismissed as not being the true motives. As for the desire to set up the cross, we will see that this expedition and subsequent ones, under the leadership of the priests, destroyed the cross wherever they found it on this western hemisphere. And we may also set aside as fiction the fitting out of the expedition to discover a new trade route to the east, because the Turks or Muslims dominated the overland trade route to that part of the world. In the absence of knowledge, this latter reasoning has appeared plausible. In order to sustain this impression as to the
Maybe
object of the
point
voyage,
your
we are
weapons
told that
to
the
the
two
enemy.
commercial and trading republics of Venice and Genoa suffered most by the loss of the eastern trade route, and that they were especially clamorous for the discovery of a new route to the east. Now, if this were a fact, why did not these two states, each comprising a seafaring people, equipped with fleets and eager for commerce and trade, send their fleets to the west to trade and make discoveries after the news of Columbus's successful voyage had spread abroad? They were the two greatest maritime states in the Mediterranean, if not in Europe, at that time. If they needed a trade route so badly,
The enemy
would they
general
not have
is
entered into
dead.
competition with the other
Oh,
nations
another enemy
for their
general
share of
dead.
trade and spoils? Instead of those two states, whom we have been told wanted it most, we find Spain, Portugal, England, France, and Holland monopolizing the trade and the spoils of discovery. None of these nations were better equipped for overseas trade or voyages than Venice and Genoa, and it is rather surprising that the latter did not engage in the western trade. If their need were so great, would not the Pope, when he assumed to divide the New World into spheres, allotting one to Spain and another to Portugal, be very likely to assign spheres, respectively, to those two Italian city-states? The whole thing is merely a part of the fabric of lies invented to conceal the real motive for projecting the voyage. Columbus was said to have been a Genoese, but discoveries have been made since which show that he was a Spanish subject, born and bred in Spain. Thus, it is obvious that the alleged reasons for the voyage are false and will not do. They have been accepted heretofore without close examination. There was another and far more urgent reason for the voyage, but before proceeding to give the real cause and back of it, let us dispose of the excuse of the Turkish or Muslim menace to commerce between Europe and the East, which was but dust for the eyes, so that men would not be able to see the real motive. There had been constant conflict.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
between the
Viking
West and East,
longhouses in
not only
Newfoundland.
during the period of time we are dealing with, but long before, and since over the land and sea route from the Mediterranean through Constantinople, and by devious routes eastward. The Muslims have dominated the main eastern overland route for more than 700 years. There was a partial interruption.
Could you,
to their
like, fire on the enemy at some
The
point today?
Christians
I'd
held the kingdom of
appreciate that.
Jerusalem for a period of 88 years. This kingdom fell in 1187 AD, and the period of the Crusades came to an end about 1285 AD. It was not the Turk who stood in the way of commerce or trade as such. The Crusades were brought on by Rome, who instigated the Christian nations of Europe to attack the Muslims in order that she might possess the so-called Holy Land. The Turks were forced to defend themselves and the land which had been in their hands
Oh yeah,
for
the
some
poor
centuries.
pressed Turks.
But there was no unsurmountable barrier to peace if Rome had wished peace, when again the stream of commerce could have resumed its wonted flow. The Turks have never abjured trade or commerce. During the wars of the Crusades, the most frightful massacres and excesses were committed due to Christian fanaticism. Yet despite all
They had
this,
it
the
coming.
Muslim king Saladin of Egypt and the Greek emperor Alexius of Byzantium had no difficulty in coming to a mutual understanding and making peace between themselves and the peoples of their respective countries. But with the Roman Church, it was different. The Fatimite Caliph of Egypt wanted to make peace with the Roman Church cohorts, and he offered to guarantee to all unharmed pilgrims an unmolested sojourn of 1 month in Jerusalem, and to aid the Crusaders on their march to the Holy City if they would acknowledge his supremacy within the bounds of his Syrian Empire. His proposal for peace was rejected.
Nice.
Rome was out for spoils and possessions to increase her income and power.
I
The
detect
onus
some
belongs
bias on
to Rome
behalf of the
for
author
whatever
here.
interruption there was to commerce with the East, and this could have been removed
This
at
part's a
any
crock
time,
of shit.
we believe, if Rome had earnestly desired it. It can readily be seen that the demand for a new trade route could not have been very strong, or Rome would have had to yield to it. So we may dismiss this reason as an invention. Moreover, if a new trade route was to be found, why look to the westward for it? We've been taught to believe through interested sources that the Western Ocean,
Oh
in
yeah,
the time
time
of
to check on
Columbus, was
Spuds.
believed to be an unknown and limitless waste of waters
Right, that's done. Oh, so the potatoes are mashed. So they are, so they are, so they are. Now let's listen to some more Irish history.
Holding the most forbidding and frightful terrors and peopled by hideous monsters of gruesome shapes who would
Hearing
destroy
beeps.
anyone venturesome enough to attempt to go far to the westward.
I don't know what beeps you would have heard,
After
but
the conquest
I'm
and
back
absorption of the Irish Church, such fictions may have been spread among the masses by the Roman Church priests, and in a few generations they would have found a wide belief. If so, they served a purpose for Rome for the time being, while she was consolidating her conquests in different parts and strengthening her organization for future expansion in Rome. The astute leaders of the church held no such notions regarding the Western Ocean.
Yeah, I get
medicine
those for
they prescribed for the
a
multitude
game
was
I
something
play,
apart,
Airline
always has
Manager,
been from what they
and
themselves
every half
partake
hour
of.
there's an
So,
update
on
saying
that point, there
if
was not
fuel
the
or
least room for doubt.
carbon
For if
taxes
they
are
believed
a
such silly
good value
fiction,
for
it
money.
is only reasonable to suppose that they would not have had at any time favored the project. That the voyage had another objective than that given out by the priests, we may well believe. The circumstances under which the voyage was promoted and aided merits a much more extended elucidation than I am privileged, from the nature of this work, to give here. Let me briefly call attention to the struggle in which Ferdinand and Isabella were engaged with the Moors in an endeavor to reclaim the kingdom of Granada. The completion of this struggle left the king and queen as exhausted of all means as did the Crusades leave practically all Europe, and more especially did the fathers of the church feel the effects due to the Crusades and the loss of revenue from the properties and privileges which they had formerly held, but which were now taken over by the kings and nobility to recoup, in a measure, the losses sustained in those wars to advance the interests of the church organization. This state of affairs had a direct bearing on the project of Columbus's voyage and on the final decision to promote it. The resources of Ferdinand and Isabella were so low that she had to pledge her jewels in order to find the means to furnish the necessary vessels and supplies. The war against the Moors, which reduced Spain to such an extremity, was waged in a measure as much as in behalf of the church to banish the infidel and reclaim the country for Christendom, as it was to regain the country for the crown of Spain. The country, as a consequence, was in a terrible state of poverty, and the church was also financially lean. This state of affairs, coupled with the fear that, owing to the persistence of Columbus in seeking aid which might be granted by someone whom the church could not control,
The enemy's tower has
caused
been
them,
destroyed.
after due deliberation, to promote the voyage at that particular time. That the papal authorities at Rome had long possessed a pretty good knowledge of the Irish intercourse with the western continent, we may well believe. This knowledge they obtained from the Irish priests, as stated by the Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg. In fact, it would have been next to impossible to have kept this knowledge from them, as Ireland was the greatest maritime nation in the world, and the one with which Rome had the longest struggle we have any record or tradition of. So it goes without saying that the hierarchy at Rome knew that the Irish Church of Iessa Creost had established Christianity, or some version of it.
My airline's called Adventure Airlines. If you wanna see it.
At the time of the suppression of the Irish Church. So, when the project of the Western Voyage was first proposed, it was looked upon with ill favor by the Church Fathers, because they considered it inopportune and the time inauspicious. They feared that the voyage would lead to the discovery and revelation of facts before the whole world which would be damaging to the Church. Therefore they tried to dissuade Columbus, under various pretexts and discouragements, to give up the idea, and in every manner possible, by argument, ridicule, and false logic, to convince him that he held erroneous ideas concerning the shape of the earth. By a display of superior learning, they sought to convince him that his theory and beliefs were alike fallacious. In the light of what transpired, it seems that those men, when they found that they could not dissuade Columbus from his purpose, parried for delay, and in the meantime,
I liked the idea of having a low-cost airline with planes which really should have been retired, and it's an adventure. But I've now since moved on to A380s and 747s, and now it's just go on an adventure with us. So for us Adventure Airlines.
Her very last available assets to finance the expedition, considering the war in which the royal pair were then engaged and the sacrifices which they had already made to advance the interests of the church. It is not reasonable to suppose that the priests would have encouraged or advised her to part with her jewels, her last penny, to back a wild and foolish proposition, as they had hitherto held it to be. But they now gave both her and the king assurances that the outcome of the voyage was a certainty beyond merely the ordinary hazards of the sea. In view of the knowledge in our possession, a fact may be stated here, one of no little importance in this connection, and that is that a companion of Columbus on this voyage is listed on the rolls as William the Irishman from Dublin. In view of the importance which is attached to this enterprise,
oh, and I made mashed potatoes with evaporated milk, because I heard that's a thing you can do.
It is but natural to suppose that men of the best skill and knowledge were secured to assist Columbus. So it is only fair to assume that this person was sea-wise in the knowledge of the Irish mariners, who were formerly the unrivaled sea voyagers of the world, from time out of mind, the nearest competitors, but far inferior range being the Norse of a later day. This Irishman, William, may have previously made such a voyage himself, which might account for his being Columbus on this voyage. If such was the case, no record of it would have been allowed to exist. The systematic suppression of facts, which is almost beyond belief, of the history of Irish achievements is most shameless and barefaced, carried on by agencies already mentioned. It is the plainest fact that Ireland's history has been written by her enemies. However, it is important to note that an Irishman was one of the personnel of that voyage. He was of the race of seamen who made voyages across the Western Ocean and had a constant intercourse with the people of this American continent from the time of the Bronze Age. See Atlantis. Art, Bronze Age Hero, page 237, 246, 249, 259, 266, and 267. It is a fair conjecture, to say the least, that he brought some particular and special knowledge to Columbus and was familiar with the seafaring traditions of his race. The Church Fathers, in all essentials, practically ruled the Spanish kingdom and were the closest advisors of the king and queen. Those shrewd men, crafty strategists with a world perspective for their organization, knew of the Irish church colonization on the opposite side of the Atlantic, and that it was from there that the priests of the Irish church obtained the gold.
I always heard the Welsh had gone to the Mississippi, but that was as the Roman Ninth Legion.
Towers, obelisks, and dolmens. Ireland itself, so far as known, never yielded more than a small amount of those metals, and they were dedicated to the use of the sun worship. The policy decided upon, judging by what actually occurred, was to place a close censorship upon the voyage. The same policy was applied to subsequent voyages, and all along we find the priest accompanying every voyage and in the van of every expedition.
The political officer, then.
He was there to observe everything discovered and to bring back a report to his superiors, and more especially to take note of the religious state and conditions which were found existing in the Western land. He was there also for the purpose of mutilating and destroying whatever evidence might be found that would be injurious or damaging to the claims of the Roman Church. This evidence was found in abundance everywhere, as will be shown. All things considered, there was no other hypothesis but this outstanding fact upon which to account for the sack and ruin of temples and altars, monuments and symbols, as well as the destruction of cities, coupled with the awful killings and massacres committed by the Spaniards, dominated by the priests, upon a highly civilized, peaceable, and practically unarmed people. They received the Spaniards as friends, even as the traditional fair gods, bearded white men, the Irish magi, returning to them again, as was expected and promised. They received them with open hospitality and welcome.
They had it
The
coming for
recompense
the
they received in turn
sacrifices.
was frightful and savage. They were slaughtered, with the result that in a few short years, the population was reduced in numbers, their leaders killed off, their civilization destroyed, and their temples and religious institutions ruined.
The remnants are just as savage,
This
if not
happened
more
not
so,
only in
than their
Mexico, but also
ancestors.
in Yucatan and Peru. It is not my purpose to go into this phase of Spanish policy extensively here, much less to treat of the enslavement of the natives, but only to show the underlying motive that was back of such action on the part of the Spaniards. This will be seen by what the priests discovered. They found here, as was expected, an abundance of proof of the Irish or Aryan connection with the religious institutions in Mexico, Peru, and elsewhere on this American continent. They were practically the same in both North and South America. It was the Irish sun worship, or Christianity, which prevailed among the civilized inhabitants of both continents. The name Cusco, the capital of Peru, the seat of the sun worship in South America, testifies to their establishing a colony there. For Cusco is an Irish name of the sun god, from case, C-A-I-S, meaning an eye, haste, a twist or turn, whirling, a stream, love, virility, of the sun in spring. The sun god Casca is still worshipped to this day, not only in Ireland, but throughout the entire Christian world, on
Oh, let's not go that
Dave
way.
Casca, Easter Sunday, the day of the risen sun in springtime. The city of Cusco was the seat of the Inca, A-I-N-C-A, or Inca, or head of the sun worship in the southern continent. These facts alone, even in the absence of other direct, positive, and indisputable proof, should leave no doubt whatever as to who discovered and civilized ancient
Farms.
America.
Yep, we're going to need farms.
I will briefly mention some only of the rites and customs which the Spanish priests found here in the religious worship of the people. They found, among other things, the worship of the Holy Virgin Mother and Child. She was worshipped as the Mother of God. The annunciation that she was to be the mother of the Savior was made to her by an angel, and the child became the crucified Savior who died on the cross. This Savior fasted for 40 days on a mountain and was tempted by Satan, the same as Iesa, Jesus. They found here the sacrament of the Eucharist and communion.
Yep.
They also found the
Let's rinse and
institution of
repeat.
prayer, confession, belief in the forgiveness of sin, fasting, and the doing of penance. They found the practice of baptism,
it's not a
where
siege
the infant
battle.
was baptized
Oh, well.
with water and the sign of the cross. This water washed away sin, and the child was born anew. They found the Irish institution of religious houses, both for virgin women who dedicated their lives to the service of God, and for men who led a chaste and pure life. They found the cross and crucifix held in great veneration everywhere in Mexico, Yucatan, and in Peru. In brief, I may say that they found in practice here in America about all of the religious rites which were brought here by the ancient priests of the Irish Church of Iesa, and which were identical with what is now called Roman Catholic Christianity. They formulated this religion originally and spread it around the world to all peoples who were capable of receiving it. It is not surprising at all if, during a period of thousands of years, it became affected with some slight changes. It would be strange if it did not. Time has affected change in all religions. Here's what the Reverend J.P. Lundy says of the rite of baptism and the manner in which it was given. Quote, American priests were found in Mexico beyond Darien, baptizing boys and girls a year old in temples at the cross, pouring the water upon them from a small pitcher. End quote. In South America, the natives took baths as a religious rite to cleanse away sin, and a very natural, but for all a remarkable thing about it is that the Irish name of those bats have survived for those thousands of years and have come down to us to confront and refute those despicable frauds who had stolen the fruits of the great Irish impulses, who were the first to preach the gospel of the Word to the whole world. Those bats were called Obukuna, or the bat of sins, that is, the bat of the cleansing of sin. The Irish word for sin is paka, and pakuna means the sins. These facts leave no room for doubt as to who owed the civilization of Mexico, Yucatan, and Peru, and elsewhere on this American continent. A Spanish priest, the Reverend Father Acosta, speaking of the religious rites and customs of the natives, says, quote, "The Indians had an infinite number of other ceremonies and customs which resembled the law of Moses, and some of these which the Moors use, and some approaching near the law of the gospel, as the baths of Obukuna, as they call them. They did wash themselves in water to cleanse themselves from sin." End quote. From Bible Myths, page 323. The Reverend Acosta seemed to marvel at these things, and as if to account for their presence among the Indians, as he calls them, gives
hidden
it
units
as his
have been
opinion
discovered.
that Satan usurped these things and gave them to the natives for his service, as he wished to be worshipped with the things which were used in the worship of God.
Our general is under
Bible
attack.
Myths, page 404. His opinion is just so much nonsense and was intended for his ignorant and superstitious followers of that age. They also found that the natives had the doctrine of the Trinity from the Irish sun worship. One of the Mexican divinities was
Oh, yes.
from Talak, the
Star
Irish
Trek
sun
Enterprise is
god.
very
The
red-pilled
names of
on
the
the
persons of
Vulcan
Trinity
menace.
are easily recognized even in this our day. As
They are
Irish names
arrogant,
of the sun
conceited
god, namely
bastards.
Izona,
Oh, and did you notice they're vegetarian as
Ekar,
well?
the genitive Baal, and Ihya,
Because we're
which is but
better
a
than
derivative
you.
of Iach, the sun god, with an ending added to it to formulate a name. And with all this, we find that the Mayas of Central America worshipped the Irish sun god Kukulkan, Kukulcan, taken from the Irish Cuchulainn, Cuculan. Can all this be attributed to mere accidental coincidence? Or can any of these be called an isolated fact? No, they belong to a series of facts constituting a mass of evidence, which establishes beyond all doubt the racial identity of the authors of our ancient American civilization. It has just been announced, April 19th, 1923, that in the ruins of the city of Chichen Itza there has been discovered the statue of Shakmaul, the famous Tiger King of the ancient Mayas. This is none other than a statue of the personified sun god, still bearing his ideal mythic title of Chakmiol, from the Irish Kak, each, every, all, the whole, universal. As Ayesa is the personal savior of each and every man, he is also the universal savior of all. And Miol, an animal, any animal, is an ideal term which the ancient Irish priests applied to the sun. Shakmul is called the Tiger King because of the fact that the tiger, or jaguar, a fierce native animal, is king of the jungle of Yucatan. This is after the Irish ideal in our Bible, that the sun is the heavenly lion, and the earthly lion is the king of the animal world. It is from this ideal that we get the term lion of the fold of Judah. What stronger proof could be produced or wished for with which to confound the falsifiers of history, Roman or British, and those who follow their lead? In the press news of the day is published the opinion of an archaeologist that the date of the structure of the vast architectural remains of Chichen Itza goes back to the 7th century A.D. Such an opinion will bear revision in view of the convincing evidence of a vastly greater antiquity. Where, we may ask, can it be shown that any other such-like structures have been built in any part of the world since the 7th century, or within even the period so-called of the Christian era? No, those buildings are many thousands of years older than some would have us believe. The cross and the crucifix are specially and peculiarly identified with the ancient Aryan sun worship and Christian church of Iesa Kriost. They are symbolic of the crucified Son in the heavens and of his human counterpart, his spirit in man, in the flesh. This identification of those symbols with the ancient Irish, who were the original missionary race of the world, makes it easy to understand why there is such a similarity in the names of the Hindu savior Krishna and the Christian savior Christ. They are all one and the same and came from the same source. And this explains also why Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Christianity so nearly resemble each other. They are all due to those missionaries of the Irish First Church of Christ. It has always been a puzzle to honest investigators to account for this striking resemblance. If the exploits or past history of the ancient Irish people were chronicled in our histories, there would have been no difficulty whatever in accounting for those facts. The same policy of destruction, suppression, and alteration which was pursued in Ireland by Rome, she also put into execution on this western continent. In Mexico, as elsewhere, anything that was found resembling Christianity was destroyed, if it was possible to do so. The Roman priests destroyed all the books they could find, and those they preserved, they altered. They deleted whole chapters from the writings of the native historians who wrote the history of Mexico. Bible Myths, page 199. Everything written by the natives was subject to an inquisition of the Spanish priests. But despite all the destruction of literature and monuments by the Spaniards and others, there is enough
Wait, the Spaniards.
to prove the connection
Yes, the
between the Irish
Spaniards.
or Aryans and the discovery and settlement of this western continent. There is a tradition among the natives of Central America that the first of their people came from over the sea to the eastward and were white men and bearded, and the beard has been proverbially worn by the ancient Irish, and they are so portrayed to us. And what is more, it has been found that one of the oldest of the Maya races, the Chiapenec, after the lapse of many thousand years, has, in its language, many words of the same meaning and almost identical with Hebrew. This is according to a Mexican scholar, Sir Melgar, in North Americans of Antiquity. Page 475, quoted in Donnelly's Atlantis, page 234. He has compiled a list of words of both languages which bears out his contention, and it has been shown, according to Donnelly, that there is a similarity between the Maya and the Phoenician alphabets, which is not surprising in view of all the facts. When we consider that the Irish were the Phoenicians, and also, as we have shown, that the Hebrews were the priestly cult among the Irish race, it makes very plain the identity of these three peoples as being one and the same. Investigators have noted the relationship between the Hebrews and the Phoenicians, attributing it to the spread of Hebrew culture and influence among the latter. This seems to be as far as they have been able to go toward enlightening us. They have left us to infer that this connection was due to the two peoples occupying two adjoining sections of country, the Hebrews occupying the interior pastoral country and the Phoenicians the sea coast. Those investigators seem to have accepted the false story of history at its face value and to have drawn their inferences accordingly. The Phoenicians and the Hebrews were one and the same race, as much so as two brothers living in the same household, or father and son in the same family. These are but trick names for the Irish race. Ireland was their seat, capital, and home country, not the eastern coast of the Mediterranean or Syria. This exposes a major deception of history and surely will help to give a clearer perspective of the past and a quickened realization of the fraud which has been imposed upon us. This deception has caused no end of confusion among scholars and investigators, but the announcement of the identity of those three races as being one is a fact, given out in these pages for the first time with a positive assurance of truth. The disclosures made here will be of aid to future investigators and philologists in tracing and accounting for the changes which have been made in the 3 alphabets said to have belonged, respectively, to the Irish, Hebrews, and Phoenicians. They are but variations of the one. We have good reason to believe, and it has been so stated, that there have been changes made in the Irish alphabet since the advent of the Latin influence of Rome into Ireland. The research work and explorations which have been made, with the excavations now going on, at the immense ruins in Mexico and Central America, if properly appraised by unbiased and capable investigators, will without a doubt correspond with the facts set forth in these pages. The very character and nature of these ruins, pyramids, sphinx, and temples at Palenque near the city of Mexico, and at Uxmal and Chichen Itza in Yucatan, and others elsewhere in America, are sufficient evidence to establish the authorship of those vast, impressive, and inspiringly instructive remains. Those first religious rites and ceremonies which were found here by the Spaniards are peculiarly of Irish origin and have been identified with their early Christian sun worship from the most ancient times. The Irish were the inspired authors of Christianity, which is plainly evident from what has been unfolded herein, and their rites are still observed in the disguised Christian sun worship of the present day. It all goes to show that there has been a deception practiced on the Christian people of the world, a terrible and a cruel deception. The reason for it is no longer a secret. And while those early masters who formulated those rites, and as well the ethical and spiritual principles which we find embodied in the myths and allegories of our Bible, were born as Irishmen of the Irish race, they were really for the world at large. They labored for all humanity. They carried the divine message of God's truth and the brotherhood of man around the world, east and west, north and south, and gave freely to such as were able to receive. To those great teachers we are indebted for our culture. We owe more to them than to any other. They cannot and they must not be denied this acknowledgement. Their works are spread throughout the world and bear a correspondence that is unmistakable. They built on so grand and imposing a scale as to proclaim to us of today their fidelity and loyalty to their exemplar and ideal Savior, the Sun God, whom they conceived as the Logos and Creator of all. And in honor of Him for His glorification and worship, they built those great and magnificent pyramids, towers, obelisks, sphinx, and temples. In brief, their works and ideals can be recognized everywhere, from the rock-walled temple ruins of the Angkor Wat in distant Cambodia, to Siam, from Ellora and the cave temple of Elephanta in India, to the islands of the Pacific, from Ireland to Egypt, from Syria to Peru, Yucatan, and Mexico. The character of their works cannot be mistaken. These facts are so clear that they cannot be mistaken or set aside. They are convincing and positive proofs. They proclaim to the world that both the religious institutions and the civilization which existed on this western continent for thousands of years were brought here by the priests of the ancient Irish sun worship and religion of Iesa Creost, the sun god.
Turns page.
Chapter 12. The going
enemy
into
general
Egypt
is dead.
The Aryan Brotherhood of Magian adepts of ancient era was made up of advanced souls who were selected to be the elder brothers and instructors of the infant or backward races of mankind in a very early period, comparatively speaking, of human habitation in this
That's
round
right,
of evolution
interdimensional
on this
lizard.
earth. They were incarnated
Rome was
into
responsible
bodies
for the
or born
cover-up.
again into the flesh to serve as guides and teachers for the new and unevolved souls who were not far enough advanced at the expiration of the previous round of planetary existence to avoid rebirth. These new souls were reincarnated here for the purpose of going through a vast series of incarnations which are necessary to the development and growth of body, soul, mind, and spirit power to attain perfection. The number of incarnations varies with each individual according to his progress towards spiritual perfection and the complete and final eradication of all earthly desires from his nature. This brotherhood of adepts were domiciled in Era for many thousands of years, during which time they explored nature in all its manifold and various aspects, both from within and without. It was here that they developed and acquired the vast and wonderful knowledge and science as demonstrated in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Ayesa, which has been the marvel of all ages since. They not only acquired a knowledge of physical nature, but also gained a knowledge and mastery of the spiritual and godlike powers within
Our general
themselves,
is under attack.
which are latent in every man, and became the true magicians, of which both history and tradition tell us.
Proud Romans all!
The evidence that Ireland is the original home of the Aryan race and the island in which the Magian priesthood rose is overwhelming. All signs point to this country to confirm this fact.
We have
Ignatius
discovered the
Donnelly,
enemy's
in his
hidden
work
units.
Atlantis, has produced a massive evidence to bear out this point. He is laboring while doing so with the idea of trying to prove the one-time existence of the lost continent of Atlantis as described by Plato.
We have
He
discovered the enemy's
accepted
hidden units.
Plato's story at its face value, not realizing that this story was but a fable invented by the priests who have written Plato's works, and intended this story to serve as an historical drop curtain on the stage of Ireland's great career. The story was invented to veil her past and to place her in oblivion at the bottom of the quote-unquote Atlantic.
Prepare to attack! Form testudo!
Donnelly was thoroughly convinced withal that the East or Asia was not the home of the Aryan race, and it is to be regretted that he did not become aware of the deception, as well as of the plot which inspired it, so that he could knowingly have refuted the propagandists, who've been writing spurious history and have applied his logic and facts to Era instead of to the fictitious Atlantis. He quotes F. Pezron in his Antiquities of the Celtae, who shows that the Celtae were the same as the Titans, the giant race who rebelled in Atlantis, and, quote, that their princes were the same with the giants of Scripture, end quote. This is clear enough to be easily understood by anyone who has not been blinded by fiction. We can see here preserved in the mythic story of the Titans an allusion to Era's great Magian cult. He says further that the same author states that the word Titan, quote, is perfect Celtic and comes from tit, the earth, and ten, or den, man, end quote. We can verify the truthfulness of this
So
definition
tits
of
are
the
of
word
the
Titan.
earth.
It is correct and most suggestive and pronounced in what it reveals to us. It is further corroborative evidence pointing unmistakably to Ireland as the homeland of the scriptures and the seat of the great Magi and of the ancient spiritual culture and civilization. From this center, they spread their culture to the ends of the earth. In the first wave of their advance, they gave Taoism the way of monastic order. And a later wave gave China Fo, one of the Irish names of the sun god. He still shines on the hills of Han. They followed the sun around the earth and preached the gospel of light and life, everlasting and continuous to the whole world, the gospel of Ayesa Krios, now called Jesus Christ. It was the seed they sowed that leavened the whole lump. And it is this very fact which is confirmed by the words attributed to the bogus Roman character St. Paul, though he remains silent as to who accomplished this arduous and wonderful missionary work, which was performed thousands of years before this unknown personage, Paul, the Spirit in the flesh, was formulated by the priggish priests of the Roman Church. It is quite obvious that Paul, or his supposed apostolic associates, in the few short years of their ministry, or their whole lifetime for that matter, could not have done this work. He is made to say in the epistle to the Colossians, quote, "For the hope which is up for you in heaven, whereof ye heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel which is come unto you, as it is in all the world. End quote.
End quote.
Chapter 1, 5 through 6. The falsifiers of history have endeavored to show that the Aryan race originated or developed in Asia. This is plainly a trumped-up theory. We will let Mr. Donnelly speak on this point. He says, quote, "But we have seen that in the earliest stages, before the first Armenian migration of the historical Aryans, a people went from Iberian Spain and settled in Ireland. And the language of this people, it is now admitted, is Aryan. And these Iberians were originally, according to tradition, from the west." Atlantis, page 457. That is, from Era, which lies in the ocean to the west of Europe, as the Irish brought their colonies and culture to Iberia, and not Iberia to Ireland, as we've been told. Mr. Donnelly, in pursuing his inquiries, further says, quote, "Where, we ask, could this ancient nation, which existed before Greek was Greek, Celt was Celt, Hindu was Hindu, or Goth was Goth, have been located? The common opinion says in Armenia or Bactria in Asia. But where in Asia could they have found a country so peaceful as to know no terms for war or bloodshed? The name of the elephant, the beast with a hand, occurs only twice in the Rig Veda. A singular omission if the Aryans were from time immemorial an Asiatic race. And when it does occur, according to Whitney in his Oriental and Linguistic Studies, it is in such a way as to show that he was still an object of wonder and terror to them." End quote. Atlantis, pages 60. So, despite all the confusion of thought on this most important point caused by the aforesaid prevaricators of history, as to the original home of the Aryans, the truth has at last been clearly brought out. And so, it must not seem strange even to the average reader to think that the world could be for so long a time so beguiled. Our beliefs regarding objects or facts are oftentimes accepted by us unconsciously, without due process of reasoning, and in youth we form prejudices in the mind which later are difficult to eradicate and overcome. Writers and investigators are no different from others, and have to contend with these influences and overcome them if they wish to arrive at the truth. It was the result of long research which caused the author of Atlantis to abandon preconceived ideas and thus bring to his mind the conviction that the fathers of the Aryan race must have dwelt for many thousand years so completely protected from barbarians and wild beasts that they at last lost all memory of them and all words descriptive of them. And where could this have been possible save in some great long civilized land, surrounded by the sea and isolated from the attack of the savage tribes that occupied the rest of the world? And if such a great civilized nation had dwelt for centuries in Asia, Europe, or Africa, why have not their monuments long ago been discovered and identified? Where is the race? Who are their natural successors and who must have continued to live after them in that happy land where they knew no human and scarcely any animal enemies? Why would any people have altogether left such a home? Why, when their civilization had spread to the ends of the earth, did it cease to exist in the peaceful region where it originated? It is to be regretted that this great student and investigator, possessing a wonderful mind and who had in his day a reputation both as a writer and scholar, did not have some inkling of the purpose and cause which produced such great changes in the homeland of the Aryan race, that its identity was no longer recognizable to his mental view. Had he known of the true cause which was back of the changes wrought, how well he could have pointed his inquiries direct to the successors of the Roman and allied marauders, the Danes and Norse, and the later British ally and spoliator who laid this Aryan motherland in ruins. However, his questions find an answer in these pages, a faint echo of the happy state which prevailed in Ara, And when she ruled the continents and the seas and carried on culture and commerce to the ends
My
of the earth,
settlement,
has come
my
down to us
Tyrian
as a
purple.
tradition which has been commemorated in song by the poet Moore. The tradition takes the form of an incident wherein a gallant knight who hears of a young lady proposing to make a journey alone through the island offers his services as an escort. She declines his offer, relying upon the honor and uprightness of her countrymen to assure her safe journey unmolested through the island from end to end. The poet couches her refusal of Sir Knight in these words, though they love woman and golden store, Erin's sons love honor and virtue more. End quote. The sentiment in this tradition, as expressed by Moore, has been attributed by some as merely due to the love of chivalry and of the ancient Irish. No, this does not rightly express it. It was all that and something else besides. It rested upon a basis of high ethical and spiritual culture. Among them, woman was respected, honored, and exalted. It finds expression in the feminine name applied to Era by an ancient poet.
Yes, this reminds me of the classic age-old anal cunt song, Women, Nature's Punching
But her
Bag.
right name was Ator. Ator means the ether, the primordial substance. They raised woman to her true position as counselor and equal. They idealized and glorified the feminine principle in such manner that the standard they set has been a model for other nations since their day. Metaphorically and mystically, they made her mother of God, queen of heaven, co-equal with the Father. Some would have us believe that it was in Persia that the Magi developed and that it was Turanian instead of Celtic. That is easily shown to be false from the fact that the Persians got the very name of their supreme deity, Zeruan Ekirin, from the Irish Magi who first introduced light and knowledge into Persia. If the Magi had developed in Persia, they would not have had to borrow term or name in which to express him from another cult or people. The name is Irish or Celtic, but is slightly modified. Zur is from the Irish sor, S-O-R, meaning bright. Ain, A-N-E, means a circle, hence the sun, the bright sun. Acherin is from the Celtic Keren, meaning black or dark. The supreme god of the Persians then expresses the two opposites, or the active and passive principles
Enemy
of
reinforcements
nature,
approaching.
and is the god of light and darkness, implying the sun god. This is in keeping with the Irish Magian idea, as one of their titles of the sun god, which has come to us, was Talak or Dalak, the two stones, the sexes, the two opposites, light and darkness, the active and passive principles in nature. The Persian Zoroaster
Why the
lit his
hell are you
torch
moving
at an
forward?
Irish fame, for the very name also bespeaks its origin. Zor is but a variant of Sor, bright, and Aster is from the Irish Eosar, God, the bright God, the sun god.
My
So,
ballista acting
Zoroaster is
screwy
the sun
again for
god
some reason.
personified, and is meant for the Archimagus or the High Hierophant of the sun worship. During their stay in Era, the Magi developed and instructed those whom they selected to add to their number in order to form a body numerous enough to spread light and civilization to distant parts, to be sent out as
This is
missionaries and
Alexander the Great's
colonizers to
legacy.
various other countries.
There's nothing Eastern
Here
about
on this
this.
island, secluded from the rest of the world at that time, they developed and maintained vast religious communities which eventually took tribal form. And here was where the patriarchal form of government first arose. And here was the scene of the incidents commemorated in the Bible story written by the inspired Magi, in which were set down the precepts of the law as well as the stories told in allegorical and mythic form of incidents and human experiences gleaned within the precincts of Inishfail, the island of wisdom, the sacred isle of the ancient Magi of Aessa, but not of Rome. Strange as it may seem to the uninitiated of all lands, here was where those who are referred to as the Hebrew cult lived and developed the arts and sciences which they spread throughout the ancient world from this, their homeland. It was this order of priesthood who are secretly alluded to as the so-called Hebrew or Jewish race. There never was another, for it is a gross misnomer to apply it to the modern Jew, so-called, whose race has simply been made the victim of a heartless and cruel persecution in order to serve the purpose of Roman fraud. Any person who will study the Irish language or investigate the Irish tribal system and traditions and the institutions of the Druids.
Right, maybe if I get them attacking walls, they won't move forward.
The mantle of this great priesthood is so unique that it cannot successfully be made to fit the shoulders of any other. These adepts knew the sun as their creator, the visible representative of the great invisible deity, their savior and their guide. They emulated him in almost every way and worshipped him knowingly and unconsciously, as the poor Christian of today is led to do unknowingly and unconsciously under the disguised name of the personified Jesus. When the time became propitious for them to begin their mission, they migrated to Egypt in sufficient numbers to take possession of that country. This fact is commemorated in the Bible myth of Jacob and his family going into Egypt, and in profane history, which is but a redressing of the biblical narrative for secular use. It is alluded to as the invasion of Egypt by the Hyksos, or shepherd kings. The name Hyksos is a disguised form of the Irish term Tig Suas, which is also pronounced Higsuas, meaning upper house and implying the rule of the Magian priesthood.
Those rumours I hear that ancient Egyptian and Welsh are the same language. I'm starting to think there's more than a shred of evidence of that now.
With their wonderful achievements. Those priest kings were called shepherds in the sense that the people they ruled over were flocks. In the narrative, Feinecian, their ruler, we are told, pastured his flocks around the base of the pyramid. That his flocks did not consist of sheep can easily be inferred from the quite obvious fact that the region surrounding the pyramid is a sandy desert and could not afford pasturage to grazing animals of any kind, either at that time or since. The ancient Irish priests constructed their mythology in accordance with the spiritual facts in life and in nature. They personified and gave human form to ideas and vitalized them so that they seemed like real characters. The later order of priests who have succeeded them adopted a similar method to set forth their fables, which have been taken as facts and accepted unquestioningly. Such is the story of Joseph, whose brethren sold him as a slave into Egypt. Joseph, in this incident of the Bible myth, represents the spiritual man, ego or self, condemned to dwell in this earthly body. His brethren who sold him were his desires, which still clung to his lower nature and condemned him to come back from the world of spirit again to incarnate in a new body. This myth is true to nature and to fact, for man is a moral being and will be drawn back again, life after life, into the body and will suffer all the ills and trials of earthly existence until he resolves to conquer his desires or lower nature and live a strictly spiritual life. It will be remembered that in the story, the brethren cast Joseph into a pit, which is but an allusion to rebirth in the body. The ancient Irish mythologists had the idea of the triune nature of man in mind when they likened the earth unto a woman and called her Mother Kiris, pronounced Kiris in Irish, a name which was later accredited to the goddess who was transferred to Greece by the plagiarists. In the myth, she was the spouse of the sun. She has been represented geographically by the three grand divisions of the ancient world according to the idea of the three principles of body, soul, and spirit. Africa, from the Irish
The battle is turning in our favor.
pronounced afar. A man represents the body or sensual nature, seed, and generation. Asia, from akolasia, passion, represents the principle of the soul or passional nature. growth, and germination.
Troops awaiting orders.
Europe, from the Irish Uirp, of the east or sun, figuratively the highest, the goddess, represents the spirit.
Praetorians.
The myth of Noah and his 3 sons also follows the threefold system, but it bears the plainest evidence of being altered by the English transcribers, for we find the English word Ham introduced to serve as the name of one of the sons. The 3 sons are Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Ham, the hips, as the name literally means, represents Africa, the lower or sensual nature of man, generation. Shem, from the Irish Sam, Samhain, and Shemos, the sun, represents Asia, or the navel, which is said to be the region of the passional nature, germination. Japhet, from Iao, Yah, changed by using the letter J instead of I into Yah, whence we get Jah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah, Japhet, represents Europe, the head spirit, or higher nature of man. The word Africa implies inconstancy. The word is formed from 2 Irish words, a fear, letter A, space, F-E-A-R, a man, and fracca, F-R-A-C-A, sport or debauch, as a fear fracca, is considered an inconstant man, sensuality. It is amazing to consider the time and energy expended by many earnest men in trying to connote facts and connect the various and fictitious Hamitic, Shemitic, and Japhetic races of men. Investigators have been following a false scent, and it would have been almost as fruitful for them to have been searching for any other imaginary races, as the Porpoteries or the Hidandarians, for instance. In the myth as set forth, Africa represents the hips or generative principle. The word Egypt itself represents the flesh or sex, the mother principle or birth in the body. The name is a formulated one. It is formed from the Irish word Ig, I-G-H, Greece, the flesh or body, and Ige, E-I-G-E, a web or womb, also Agak, clamorous, desire, hence the Irish name Egypt, E-I-G-H-I-P-T. It is presented to us in disguised form as Egypt, implying birth in the body. In both Irish myth and story, suggestive and often direct and plain language is used, and the Bible itself, being an Irish book originally, is proof of it. As the sun was said to go down into a cave in the west at night in the ocean to his daily death, his spirit in man also descends into the cave of the body at generation and birth, where it is said to be dead. It is said that the body is death to the spirit, as the bodily desires are blocked and dead. Spiritual ones are blind.
The enemy
The more
general
we are
is
absorbed
dead.
in the things of the body and absorbed on this material plane, the less we are in the things of the spirit. This truth is embodied in the pyramid itself. It is greater in bulk at the base, where it has contact with the earth, than at any other point. As the higher it ascends and recedes from the earth, the less body it has until it terminates at the point, symbolically, where matter ends and spirit begins.
Jupiter gives us strength.
Chapter 13. The 4 pyramid group and sphinx, designed and erected to symbolize man. The Great Pyramid of Ayesa is one of a group of 4.
Yay,
namely
I won.
Ayesa, the largest.
41
Shifrens,
deaths.
the second in size, Mycenaeans, the third in size, and Asicus, the least and lowest of the group. This group, with the Great Sphinx,
Another hour
forms
to
the most
go.
important and significant group of symbols ever erected by the hand of man. The complex nature of man has been set forth under a various enumeration or system of set principles by different schools of thought, such as the threefold, fourfold, and sevenfold principles of man. This group of pyramids represents the fourfold system, and as symbolized by those monuments, is inclusive of the others. the Magian Grand Architect, built in accordance with this fourfold idea, which is also embodied in mythical and cryptic language in the Bible, and again gives additional proof as to its origin and authorship by the inspired Irish Magian adepts, who built for all time on a true foundation. Under this fourfold system, the body is divided into 4 regions or centers, namely the region of the head, the heart, the navel or bowels, and the genitals, each center being the seat of the active principles as comprehended in this fourfold summary of man's nature. The theory which is most entertained is that the pyramids in general, and more particularly the group of 4 which symbolizes this fourfold summary of man's composition and qualities, were built as tombs for the kings who are said to have built them and whose names they are said to bear. Most of our modern paragraphers and writers have advanced this idea. The formulated names of the 4 pyramids were said to be the names of men who were rulers and members of a dynasty who ruled over Egypt in successive order as follows: Cheops, his brother Chephren, Mycerinus, and Osychus. Cheops is said to have been possessed of the desire to build himself a great monument which would immortalize his name, a monument which would serve as a fit tomb for his body. His brother Chephren was reputed to have a similar ambition to erect a monument and tomb that would rival that of his brother. Mycerinus, the son of Cheops, is said to have been equally desirous of duplicating or surpassing the example set by his predecessors, father and uncle, and erect a monument and tomb for himself. And Osychus also, we are told, was ambitious to even excel all the others and erect an enduring monument and tomb to perpetuate his memory. The historical authenticity of this dynastic family of kingly personages has been generally accepted until now. My discoveries prove them to be allegorical and fictitious, and will destroy this fiction, and substitute therefore the sublime and valuable truths which are secretly embodied in the names of those 4 pyramids. The explanation of the symbol of the Great Sphinx will also throw additional light on the purpose which inspired the erection of those gigantic monuments and the truths which they were so faithfully intended to convey to the initiated, and destined henceforth, we believe, to be a perpetual reminder to man of what he now is and what he is ultimately to become, one in union of spirit with the sun god Iesa, the creator. Chapter 14. The mystery of the Sphinx, the problem solved. From the very remote age in which this strange and peculiar monument was erected as a companion symbol to the Great Pyramid of Iesa, it is mystified, reflecting mankind. Outside the ranks of the comparatively few who were chosen for initiation into the mystery rites of the Great Pyramid Temple, there was no knowledge extant among the great mass of mankind regarding the significance of this strange, odd, and withal uncanny piece of architecture. This ignorance of its significance and of the reason for its being has continued among men down to this present day. The questions which came before the minds of the men of the past ages, no less than those which come before the minds of the men of our time, were: why was this structure built? Who erected it? And what does it represent? What sort of minds could men be possessed of who could have expended such a vast amount of time and energy in designing and erecting such an apparently fantastic creation in stone in the midst of the solitary desolation of the sandy desert? What use or purpose could it fulfill? No solution has come down through all the ages since that far-off time that would satisfy those earnest and longing inquiries until now.
Oh, what's that? Bactia?
An atmosphere of awe and mystery was purposely cultivated and spread abroad among the populace, which had the effect of making it next to impossible to arrive at a true and real understanding of the creation and meaning of the Great Sphinx. Fables were invented and circulated concerning it. The people were led to believe that this curious structure represented a monster that was but a type of a race of beings which formerly inhabited the earth, but which was now extinct. One of the regular and particular purposes for which we are told it was erected was to function as an official quarters for the use of the Pythoness or seeress, from which to give forth her oracles, and that her aid and offices were sought by the people in solving the problems of daily life, which were too intricate for themselves to solve, or to gratify the curious or the mystical who desired to pry into the future. Hence the legend of consulting the Sphinx, which has come down to us from very early times, though long subsequent to its erection by the Magi. For consulting the seeress is an institution or practice which, in general, has survived from a very hoary antiquity. Its character varies in degree, but in general it was practiced by the unregenerate. There are traces of it yet visible in our own day. For this purpose there was a special room set apart by the priests, and from this niche or chamber called the Aditum, she gave forth her predictions or oracles. The mystification of the ancient populaces alone has not been the only effect of ignorance of the true nature and purpose of the Great Sphinx, but it has also served to keep modern mankind in ignorance and darkness as well. One of the fabulous stories told, which has served to keep an air of mystery about the Great Sphinx, is that the oracle propounded an enigma which no one was able to solve. She asked, "What animal is it that in its infancy walked on 4 legs, and in its adolescent state walked on 2 legs, and in its old age walked on 3 legs?" End quote. No one could solve the problem, we are told, until Oedipus, the priest, came along and made answer that the animal was man, who walked on all 4s in his infancy and on 2 legs in his adolescence, and with the aid of a cane walked on 3 legs in his old age. Whereupon, we're told, in a rage, the oracle flung herself on the rocks and was dashed to death. The use of this great sphinx was but a minor one, and when it was inaugurated, was for the purpose of interesting and holding the multitude in subjection. The primal cause and reason for the erection of this most unique structure, with the head of a woman and the body of a lion, was to fulfill the design of the great Irish adept architect to form an indispensable and integral part in the Great Pyramid's symbolic group, and serve as a most fitting symbol of man. He is here represented in his twofold aspect, the upper part representing the human soul, nature, and the lower part the animal nature and qualities in his being. In a most true and fitting sense, then, the Great Sphinx was designed to symbolize the unregenerate man, who has as yet 2 aspects only, soul and animal nature. He has not yet become spiritual, spirit being the 3rd aspect in man's triune nature. This explains why the head of the Great Sphinx is that of a woman, for the reason that the soul is said to be feminine. So this most impressive symbol is fittingly grouped and connected with the plan and purpose of the pyramidal monuments, and stands in direct contrast with the Great Pyramid of Iesa, which represents spirit. In one aspect, the Great Sphinx represents the neophyte, or in modern phraseology, the candidate who is to be inducted into the occult mysteries of the Great Pyramid Temple, wherein wisdom would be received which would enable him to liberate himself from his lower or animal, and build up his spiritual body or nature. The location in the desert made a fit and appropriate setting for those wonderfully expressive symbols, and in accord with the esoteric or hidden truths embodied in them, as it was held that the world itself, or this material plane, is a desert to the spirit. And this brings home to us an appreciation of the great wisdom of that school of Irish adept masters, who were the first to discover and explore the profound depths of man's inner nature. They were the first Freemasons from Frey, P-H-R-E, the sun. And it was in Ireland that Freemasonry first began, came into flower, and from there spread throughout the entire world. Ireland was the country par excellence and the original homeland of Freemasonry. The low plane to which it fell in England under the sway of the bishops may be estimated from the fact that it became associated with the coarse revelry of the alehouse and tavern. For modern Freemasonry is historically said to have had its birth in the Apple Tree Tavern in London in the year 1717. This fact reflects the very low moral status of the people of England under the care, or rather lack of it, of a self-indulgent clergy. It is all too suggestive of the carousals of the inn, where the piper played vulgar tunes such as the alehouse keeper in great glee, the Banks of Claudy, Jack and his bottle of punch, and the bonny Highland laddie. In every age, poets, philosophers, and sages have sung paeans of praise to masonry, but not from a tavern. To say the least, it was not an ideal setting for masonry. The atmosphere of the tavern is not suitable to the temple or to higher aspirations. Well may men exclaim, "O Era, to what depths hast thy bright flame fallen through the baseness and rapacity of those who envied thy glory and coveted thy possessions. They extinguished the light without themselves possessing it." Freemasons have accepted much for granted. In this respect, they do not differ from the generality of men. Freemasonry has lost many of its ancient landmarks, and its lights have been dimmed through the influence of the bishops, who have made it subordinate to the creeds. Metaphorically speaking, the Christian creeds are but rivulets from the well, flowing through and polluted by the alluvial soil of human misconceptions. Ancient Freemasonry was the clear well of wisdom, which tradition tells us was geographically situated in Midian, not the fictitious so-called Media of the priest-scribes, but what was anciently the province, now the county, of Maeve in Ireland, where was situated Seiscan, the seat of wisdom, at Tara. If Masonry has become materialistic or narrow and has lost her soul through the influence of priests and prelates who have obscured her light, she yet shall find it and be restored to her former glorified estate. She shall become again the bright, resplendent, and adorable, the great mother of all living.
Time to die.
The paucity of knowledge among men regarding the significance of these great emblems has found expression in a phrase which has become an aphorism. To wit,
war, good,
as meaningless as the pyramids and the Sphinx,
and your screams on the morning air.
The truths which are herein unfolded leave no further use for such a phrase, and as a comparative expression of speech, it henceforth becomes redundant. For those venerable monuments once more become alive with meaning and bespeak to all men their inspired message, and as time progresses, they will increase as objects of fervid interest and elicit more and more the wonder and admiration of mankind for the truths they embody and for the great master adepts who in this manner memorialized them. In its ancient, perfect state, the unique structure of the Great Sphinx had an outer covering of white stone and was crowned with a silver headpiece to symbolize the imperishable nature of the soul and to reflect back those streaming rays which it received from the Lord Iesa, the heavenly sun, or sun, S-O-N.
That should be interesting.
Chapter 15. The Pyramid of Ophiuchus. Backward or undeveloped man, born into the body or flesh in the physical world, is engrossed in his animal nature, sensuality, and it may be said that the generality of mankind, even today, although the race has advanced somewhat on the upward trend, are still more or less enchained by their gross sensual nature. Therefore, in accordance with this fact in man's nature, the pyramid of Ophiuchus represents the lower principles or the sensual nature in man, seed, and generation. The true definition of the word pyramid will of itself at once suggest this meaning.
Even-tempered heart. This is good.
The derivation of the word has been sought for by
enemy
many
reinforcements
writers and
approaching.
investigators without success.
I will pay it
They have
no
sought
heed.
for it in the Greek,
As to your
Arabic,
part,
Coptic, Latin,
stand
Spanish, and
ready.
French languages, but they've never ventured to search for it at its true source. Dr. Sayce, in his pyramid work, A Miracle in Stone, on page 46, cites Chevalier Bunsen as authority that it is a Coptic word meaning a division of 10, from pyr, P-Y-R, meaning division,
Stinging
and
nettles.
met, meaning 10. However this may be, insofar as the meaning of the Coptic words pyr and met are concerned, they are not germane to the idea or sense embodied, either in the word pyramid or in the symbol itself. That it is not the true derivation of the word will be seen. The word pyramid has a true and faithful correspondence and relationship to what has already been explained regarding the lower principle of man's nature. In this word, we again discover the fine hand of the clerical doctor at work to obscure the origin and authorship and meaning of these grand and venerable symbols. The word pyramid is formed from the Irish
Interesting.
word pyr,
Traps in
P-E-I-R, meaning the buttocks or hips, and the English word amid, meaning literally
More
the middle
traps.
of the hips or buttocks. The phallus, or organ of sex, and by changing the form of the word for deceptive purposes, they have made it pyramid. A great many investigators have been deceived by such trickery, but the truth will prevail in the end. It is this very idea of the besetting sin through man's lower nature which is in the mind of the prophet Isaiah, prophet of the Irish sun god Iesa, when he says, quote,
We was Hebrews,
shall the king of
Phoenicians, and
Assyria lead away
Egyptians.
the Egyptians
So we were,
prisoners,
so we were,
and
so
the
we ams.
Ethiopians captives,
We was also
young and
Atlantis.
old, naked
We were
and
the
barefoot,
kings.
even with
We
their
were the white
buttocks
gods that were in South
uncovered,
America.
to the shame of the Egyptians.
So we were. We were Phoenicians. Feinecians.
Isaiah 20.
Phoenicians, Phoenicians. Potato, potato.
To amplify this truth, if we do not suppress and conquer our desires, they will master and rule us and become our kings. Unless we overcome, we shall be in bondage to our ruling desire. This is plainly said from the words of Isaiah. Quote, And the inhabitants of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help, to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? End quote. Isaiah 26. In the ideology of the ancient Irish, the ass typified the animal nature, or unspiritual man, and recognizing the fact
this is
that
gonna take
all
too
men
long.
are not equally
I want my
involved in
steak.
occupying the same level in spiritual progress, the white she-ass typified the man not possessed of spiritual knowledge, but capable of acquiring it. The very name Ophiuchus itself suggests that this pyramid is called after the ass and was intended to
Ass.
symbolize this animal or unspiritual quality in man,
Ass.
which he must eradicate from his nature. It is plainly the burden of Isaiah's thoughts. Quote, that I will break the Assyrians in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them,
Our
and
hidden
his
units
burden
have been discovered.
depart from off their shoulders.
Oh no, thank you, aide
This
de
is the
camp.
purpose that is proposed upon the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations.
Proud Romans
Isaiah
all.
14, 25 and 26.
We have discovered the enemy's hidden units. Heavy horse at your command.
In the title of this pyramid, we have a formulated name composed of the Irish word asal, or the English word ass, with the Greek ending, hence ossicus. This pyramid is built of coarse brick, of a brownish or dull yellowish hue, said to correspond in the astral world of colors to the auric shade of hues emanating from the sensual man. Thoughts and emotions have color.
Our general is under
in the
attack.
astral world, a man's status spiritually is cognized by the colors radiating from him. The nerve center in the forehead, from which emanates the auric light and colors, indicates one's status on the astral plane. Quote, if the light radiating from it is golden yellow, it is the name of the sun.
We have discovered
If
the enemy's
dull
hidden
red or
units.
green, it is the brand of the beast. End quote. Apocalypse unseen by John. It is this fact in man's nature which forms the basis of the Christian being told, without any explanation being given to him, that his sins were written upon his forehead. In the astral or the higher spiritual planes of nature, the disembodied soul goes to the plane corresponding to its condition, and this can even be much more easily perceived than a man's color can be distinguished on his physical plane, as to whether he is white or black, red or yellow. So it is a fact in nature that the plane in the astral or lower spiritual world on which the soul exists, immediately after leaving the body, is determined by the life it lived while in the body. If it is foul from evil thoughts and deeds, it will go to a low plane, corresponding to its condition, where suffering and purification take place before it can ascend to a higher plane. The pyramid of Ossicus was a constant reminder to the instructed of these important truths, that he might exercise his will to control his thoughts and reflect on the enormity as well as on the penalty of transgressing the good or moral laws. Chapter 16. The Pyramid of Feinecians. This pyramid represents the passion and desire principle in man. Physically, it represents the navel or bowels, the region of the body which is said to be the seat of the passional or desire nature. Feinecians is a name which has been formulated to embody the idea of the destructive force and effect of the emotions, appetites, passions, and desires upon the spiritual efforts of man to build up the spiritual fabric of his being by conquering his lower nature. The passional nature is tenacious, and the desires are clamorous to assert themselves. They are forever gnawing, as it were, to eat away and destroy as fast as he builds up. And it is only by consciously suppressing them and keeping them in abeyance until he is finally able to eradicate them from his nature that spirituality is attained. This pyramid symbolizes this fact in man's being. That such a fact as a part of man's nature becomes very plain to us when we understand that in the long ages of the past, the soul or personality of man has evolved through the animal kingdom, and he retains more or less strongly yet the traits and tendencies of the animal nature in his personality, such as anger, selfishness, jealousy, etc. This fact is embodied in the Bible myth of the ark, for man himself is the ark into which went a pair, male and female, of the animals of every living species. So the name of this pyramid has been invented to secretly embody this principle or truth. It is a most suggestive name when once it is explained. It suggests that the mice are in us. Mice and moles gnaw and burrow and often destroy the work of man on the material plane. The animal passions, emotions, appetites, and desires of man gnaw and destroy and defeat his efforts to build up his spiritual or solar body. They interfere with and prevent the perfecting work of man if they are not suppressed and overcome. This truth is embodied in the allegorical description of the building of the walls of Jerusalem. This city represents the spiritual body of man, or the heavenly city, which is within himself. The building of this spiritual city or body is the burden of Nehemiah's theme. The characters Sanballat and Tobiah, introduced in the story, are merely derogatory epithets, personified and applied to traits and tendencies in the man who is identified with his sensual nature. And the Arabians and Ammonites, wandering peoples of the desert of low and thieving proclivities, are introduced to represent these lower qualities in man. This allusion made here will be found in the 4th chapter and 7th verse, which is as follows. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were wroth. End quote. This will make the meaning very clear when the name Ashdodites is defined. It signifies the singed, from the Irish word dove, D-O-D-H-E, meaning burned, those who burn with desire, the evildoers, the sensual. And as these characters and peoples represent the lower and destructive qualities in our nature, it will be very easy to understand the meaning of the 8th or following verse in the same chapter, which is as follows, quote, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it, end quote. Nehemiah 4, chapter 8. These elements in our nature.
There's a lot of Belgians to kill. They're not breaking out.
Death and rebirth. It is the goal of man to achieve liberation from his lower nature, and it is an individual task for each and every human being to accomplish. That it is an arduous task may be gleaned from the great Magian truth which has been preserved in the book of Proverbs, without a note of acknowledgement by our commentators to the great adepts who were the first to discover man's secret inner nature. Quote, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. End quote. Proverbs 16:32. Hence, the pyramid Mycerinus was erected to be a constant reminder to man to conquer his passional nature. This pyramid, in its former perfect state, like the pyramids Chephren, was completely covered with an outside finishing layer of white limestone, which made it an impressive object under the bright glare of the Egyptian sun. Chapter 17. The Pyramid of Chephren. This pyramid represents physically the third region of the body or heart, which is said to be the seat of a twofold principle in man, which is commonly called the soul. This consists of a higher and a lower principle. The former is lasting, the latter temporary and perishable. We will endeavor to show that this pyramid symbolizes this twofold principle of the soul, and that it was known to those who bestowed the name of Chephren upon it. This is a slightly camouflaged name, and is a compound Irish word with a Greek ending. The Irish word for a disembodied soul, fairy, or aerial being, is Chefri. And by dropping an E and substituting an N in the last syllable, they made it Chephren, which is the same as the Greek term Phren, P-H-R-E-N, the lower mind or perishable principle of the soul.
Don't you want to fight anymore?
Apocalypse Unsealed, pages 14 and 54 by John M. Reyes. That the Irish Magian architect who designed and supervised the erection of this grand
We have
pyramid,
discovered the enemy's hidden
in height
units.
to that of the Great Pyramid of Iessa, understood this truth goes without saying. It was a part of the esoteric instruction which was given by them to the initiates of all the ancient priesthoods which they established in the various countries which they visited in their missionary pilgrimage. They also embodied this truth in our Irish Bible, which we've been falsely taught to believe a Syrian Jewish book. In order to grasp this truth of the dual nature of the soul more easily, I am writing for the
We have discovered the enemy's hidden units.
more advanced. Let us bear in mind the neophyte who is striving to eradicate all the evil qualities and propensities from his nature and to build up his perfect spiritual or solar body. In doing this work, he arrives at an intermediate stage of spiritual growth, represented physically at the midriff, where he parts with his carnal or animal qualities, and which is symbolized by this pyramid. In the upward progress of man's spiritual development, it is the first of the four pyramids emblemizing the permanent or immortal elements in his nature. The lower qualities of the soul belong to the animal nature of man. When he arrives at this stage of advancement, he has succeeded in separating himself from his lower principles. It is this truth which is embodied in the Bible myth of the half-tribe of Manasseh, which is but an allusion to the ego or self arriving at the state of consciousness where takes place the separation of his higher mind or qualities, which are permanent, from the lower mind or perishable qualities of the soul, which disintegrates in the lower psychic world. Manasseh is a name formed from the Irish word maon, manas, meaning mind. One of the Irish names of God is Man, M-A-N-N, the supreme mind. This truth is illustrated by Joseph, the advancing man who, in his upward progress at this stage in the Irish myth in our Bible, is called Manasseh, and at a higher stage is called Ephraim. These two characters are said to be brothers, which is merely a figure of speech in the allegory. In this story, we are told that Joseph, who is the ego or self, married the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, the priest of the sun. In the metaphor of the allegory, the daughter signifies wisdom. So we see that Joseph obtained wisdom from the priest of the sun, which wisdom enabled him to create two sons, that is, to take two progressive steps higher towards the goal of final emancipation from the trammels of his earthly nature. This idea of the dual character of the soul, that no particle of the lower principles can attach to the higher or immortal soul, is set forth in the allegory in the second chapter of Nehemiah.
Oh, gore-drenched. What does that mean?
In the story, Jerusalem represents the ideal holy city or perfect spiritual body, which the ego or self is building up.
693 for that.
In the narrative,
620
the ego or
in
self
general
in his
done
progress
good.
or travels is
That is what
reconnoitering
I think
the
called a
environs
baptism
of
by fire.
Jerusalem, and the idea of this duality is secretly embodied thus. Quote, "And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon." End quote. Nehemiah 2:12. The beast is his own animal nature. And again, quote, "Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass." End quote. Nehemiah 2:14. So these are the spiritual truths of the soul, which are symbolized by the pyramid of Chephren.
Nice.
This grand pyramid, before it was despoiled by zealous fanatics, had an outer casing of white limestone which glistened in the sunlight, in correspondence with the higher and immortal principle of the luminous soul which it emblemized. This pyramid was crowned with a silver capstone. Among the ancient Irish, silver was one of the precious metals sacred to the sun worship and dedicated to the goddess Luna, spouse of the sun, and typified the imperishable element of the soul. Chapter 18. The Great Pyramid of Ayesa.
We hunger for battle.
An axiom of the great Irish priesthood of the sun was that, as above, so below, but in inverse order.
What was that on?
As for instance,
That battle?
what is divine love on the highest spiritual plane or the celestial
250
world
BC.
becomes carnal love here below on the physical plane.
Yep, I won that
They
one.
knew by direct cognition the secrets of nature and recognized the fact that man was both spiritually and physically
I
the
want to
child
eat,
of the sun,
so,
his father, and the
as
earth,
interesting as
his
this
mother.
is.
They venerated all life and held it sacred. As the earth was the mother of all life and mankind her
Right,
highest
thanks
offspring,
very much for
they
watching.
found a correspondence or analogy between
And, yeah, that's very interesting. Irish wisdom preserved in the Bible